Welcome to the November 28th meeting of the Park Advisory Committee for the East Bay Regional Park District. It's 4:07 p.m. and I will be filling in tonight for Chair Carlin Obringer. I'm Neil Tsutsui. Madam Secretary, could we please have the roll called? Oh, looks like you're still muted.
Thank you. Absolutely, Chair Tsutsui. This is Yuli Padmore taking roll. We'll start with Marie Arce. Moving forward with Andrew Carey.
I'm here.
James Chang.
Here.
Susie Claxton.
Here.
Sharon Corkin. Linda DeChambeau. Linda DeChambeau. Irene Dieter.
Here.
Luana España.
Present.
Michelle Lacey.
Here.
Dev Mahadevan.
Here.
Rochelle Nason.
Here.
Carlin Obringer is not present. And Rick Rickard.
Here.
Alyssa Robinson.
Here.
Olivia San Wong.
Here.
Bob Simmons. Igor Scaredoff.
Here.
Roland Williams.
Here.
And acting chair Neil Tsutsui.
Here.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. And did you want to recognize the staff and director present?
Absolutely. Currently, I'll start with our chair director. That's Elizabeth Eccles, Director Elizabeth Eccles.
Thank you. Hi, everybody.
We have Eric Feeler, the lead staff of the Park Advisory Committee, Deborah Spalding, Chief Chibrero, Kim Tai. This is in no particular order, folks. I'm just throwing it out there. We have Deborah Ocker, Jim O'Connor, Naoma Laval, Claire Griffin, Sean Dugan, Steve Castile, and did I say Kim Tai already? I think I said Kim Tai. I think that's everyone. If I've missed any of the staff members, if you can please raise your hand and we'll be sure to call you. I think we're good. Oh, and Yuli Padmore. Hi.
Great, thanks so much. Just a brief announcement, the purpose of conducting the meeting as described in this notice is to provide the safest environment for staff and public while allowing for public participation. Pursuant to the Brown Act as amended by AB 361, the board of directors and staff may participate in the board meetings via video or phone conferencing and/or through a hybrid of in-person and remote attendance. The East Bay Regional Park District or Park District intends to hold meetings through either entirely virtual platform or a hybrid of in-person attendance with a board of directors, designated staff, and limited members of the public to participate in person at the Park District headquarters, 2950 Peralta Oaks Court, Oakland, California, and through the Park District's virtual platform Zoom. If the committee decides to hold a hybrid in-person meeting, attendance by members of the public will be subject to maximum capacity of 5, as well as compliance with current health and safety protocols. This information can be found on the agenda on the district website, ebparks.org. Do any committee members have any questions about the meeting procedures? Seeing none, we will proceed with the agenda. So item number 2 is public comments. Are there members of the public present who have comments for items not on the agenda? These comments are limited to 3 minutes in time. If you have a comment for an item that is on the agenda, there will be an opportunity later to make those comments.
Oh, great. It looks like we have 2 hands raised, and I actually have an application so that folks can see how much time they have. So I'm going to put that on the screen, and we'll start with Virginia Farr and then Kelly Abreu. So let me just...
Sorry.
Oh, no problem. I'm just going to put this timer on the screen, and I will start it now.
So I'm not sure if the new corral agenda is on the agenda and that's when we talk about it then, or do we talk about it now?
There is the Las Trampas land use plan amendment that's on the agenda. Is the item you're referring to?
Yes. Do I make a comment opposing it now, or do I wait till later?
Yeah, let's wait until we have that, until we're at that agenda item.
Okay. How much of my time do I have to wait to do that?
It's coming up. We have 2 items before that, and then we'll be getting to the Southern Las Trampas Land Use Plan Amendment Draft Environmental Impact Report after that.
So 30 minutes, 45 minutes?
It's hard to say. We can't predict exactly how long these items will take.
Virginia, there is an option to tune in via YouTube if you wanted to tune in, and then you can listen in to when the item will come up if you would prefer that option.
No, it's just frustrating. You have to wait for this. Okay.
And Kelly Abreu, is your item an item on the agenda?
No.
Okay. Let me pull the timer up, and then we see Jim Hansen is also here, so we'll call you after Kelly Abreu. So just one moment. Let me put the timer on the screen. All right.
All right. Well, first of all, with regards to the agenda today, I see item number 2 as approval of the minutes. Item number 3 is board comments, and item number 4 is public comments. So you've caught us all by surprise.
I've already made a mistake.
Oh, okay. Well, let's talk about some more of the mistakes, this time by the City of Fremont City Council. 1 week ago, they talked about, they spent 2 hours, over 2 hours, I think it was about 2 hours, going over, skewering Mission Peak and eviscerating it. They had a lot of misconceptions over there. For example, one of their big issues was about this proposed lease. They were, you know, the staff, their staff, the Park District staff, Park District directors, I'm sure everybody outside of that city council all expected them to just, you know, approve it because it was a reasonable agreement. But instead, they went off and rejected it out of hand. But first, they spent 2 hours complaining about all its defects. One defect they said was it's a 20-year lease, and that was way too long. They said, "Oh my God, we've never seen a lease that long." Well, it turns out that over here also in Fremont, they have a lease on file. I actually got the lease. It's called Ardenwood Historical Park. It's a 50-year lease. 50-year lease, and they never heard of it. They thought that the 20 years was too long. They're doing 50-year leases, folks. Then they had people, they had this gang of people that live next door and are very vocal, you know, and they're putting out all these misrepresentations. For example, they say that there are people going into the park and trespassing at night all the time, and they think that the crime is rampant. They want to ban parking on the public street that's closest to the park called Vineyard Avenue. They're going through the lease word by word and modifying it. A lot of these things that they're complaining about, like the crime rate, basically this park is safer than most of the other parks around, just to let you know. The nighttime violations, curfew violations, those are kind of minor if you look at the data. And there's a lot of things that they are misrepresenting. So once again, another fiasco, and they rejected the lease and sent their staff off to renegotiate it and make it tougher. I'm not sure that that they really should be negotiating with the park district. Maybe they should just take over that park and do it themselves. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kelly. And again, my apologies. I did skip forward 2 items. So let's come back to our next public comment after we get back on track with the agenda. Sorry about that, Director Eccles, my apologies. So let's first do approval of the minutes. Does anybody on the committee have comments on the minutes from our last PAC meeting? Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
I will so move.
Michelle.
So I see Michelle moved, and was that Igor with a second?
It was.
Okay. Madam Secretary, could you take the roll, please? The roll call vote.
Yes. Here we go. Andrew Carey,
Aye.
James Chang,
Yes.
Susie Claxton,
Aye.
Sharon Corkin, and Marie Arce, Linda Deschambeau, Irene Dieter,
Yes.
Luana Espana,
Yes.
Michelle Lacey,
Yes.
Dev Mahadevan, Rochelle Nason,
Yes.
Dev Mahadevan,
I was on mute, sorry. Aye.
oh great, Rick Rickard,
Aye.
Alyssa Robinson,
Aye.
Olivia San Wong,
Yes.
Bob Simmons, Igor Skerdoff,
Aye.
Neil Titsui,
Aye.
and Roland Williams.
Aye, and just for clarification, we're approving both sets of minutes?
Yes, my understanding is we're approving September and October.
Aye.
Great. Thank you, everybody. And now on to board member comments. We have Ward 1 Director Elizabeth Eccles with us tonight. Welcome.
Hi, well, good afternoon, everybody. And I actually think that it's important to do the public comments first. So no worries at all of skipping over mine. Well, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here this afternoon. I really appreciate the invitation. I plan to provide a brief year in review highlighting activities and openings in Ward 1. And I know you have a full agenda this evening, so I will go through my slides quickly. I'm certainly happy to answer any questions during or after my presentation. I probably won't be able to see you with the slides up, so please feel free to shout out your questions if you like. And I also want to apologize in advance that I can't stay for the whole meeting because of another commitment. So, as you know, I represent communities in Northern Alameda and Western Contra Costa counties, including Albany, Berkeley, El Cerrito, El Sobrante, Emeryville, Kensington, Richmond, San Pablo, and parts of Pinole. And the Ward 1 regional parks include Brooks Island, Kennedy Grove, McLaughlin, East Shore, Miller Knox, Point Isabel, Point Pinole, Sobrante Ridge, Tilden, and Wildcat Canyon. So just a wonderful part of the world. Of course, all of the regional parks are in wonderful parts of the world. So what's new in Ward 1? This year we've had a Brickyard Cove opening, which is part of McLaughlin East Shore Park, the Botanic Garden Crevice Garden opening in Tilden Park, Point Malate Bay Trail extension, and I'm also going to talk about hopefully a future park at Point Malate, a true regional park, the Pinole Point to Point Wilson Trail connection, And then I'm also just going to touch on briefly some issues that impact the whole park, including the ongoing wildfire fuels reduction and the sudden tree die-off. And that I will do quickly because you've probably heard about some of that from other sources. So to start off with Brickyard Cove, we opened Brickyard Cove in March of this year, and it's the newest addition to McLaughlin East Shore Park, which is itself a result of decades-long community effort by citizens, community organizations, elected officials, and public agencies to protect the bay shoreline as a public resource. There were actually some people back in the day who, and this is going back 50 years, but who wanted to put a shopping center there. So just imagine how different that would be. So in the meantime, the Brickyard Cove was used to pile up excavated dirt and construction debris by its past owner, Santa Fe Railway. And it was basically became 53 feet of excavated dirt and construction debris. And much of that fill deposited at the site were bricks, and that's why it got the name Brickyard Cove. And some of these bricks are still visible today. The funding for Brickyard Cove came entirely from a $5 million state funding that was championed by Senator Lonnie Hancock, along with then Mayor Tom Bates and Senator Nancy Skinner. And you can see they are there at the opening, at the dedication ceremony, along with the current mayor of Berkeley, Jesse Arreguín, and Robert Chasty. So it's really a fun event. So now the site, which was once fenced off and forbidden to the public, is accessible with new recreational amenities and magnificent views of the San Francisco Bay for everyone to enjoy. Brickyard Cove provides access to the shoreline for walking, biking, nature viewing, bike racks, new parking, picnic tables, restrooms, interpretive signage, and it also connects the San Francisco Bay Trail. So it connects to the San Francisco Bay Trail rather. And that's very important too, because, one of the things that I feel really passionately about is connecting communities on one side of the freeway with parks and activities on the other side of this, where we have this beautiful shoreline. So it's, it's great to have this opportunity to not only open this park, but have it connect up with the San Francisco Bay Trail. More recently, in August of this year, we opened the Botanic Garden, the Crevice Garden at the Botanic Garden in Tilden Park. And this is it's a beautiful exhibit. I really encourage you folks to be there, but you might to come visit, but you might want to wait a little bit, because my daughter and I were just there this weekend, and a lot of the plants have dried out, which I guess they would be doing in the Sierra Nevada region at this time. But basically, this garden highlights the native plants in alpine plants from the High Sierra Nevada region of California. And the garden was started in 2020 and then completed in 2021. And it's an incredible new feature for the Botanic Garden. It's garnered local and national attention for its creativity, beauty, and functionality. And it was inspired by the natural rock outcrops in the High Sierras. Actually, at the opening, I had just returned from the High Sierras, and it was making me homesick for the high mountains. But anyway, we can go see them in the Botanic Garden. On September 30th, we celebrated, you can advance, Yuli. Okay. On September 30th, we celebrated the Park District's connection to the legacy of the nationally renowned landscape architects, Frederick Law Olmsted Sr., his son, Frederick Law Olmsted Jr., and the Olmsted Brothers architecture firm. And we had a lot of their descendants at this event, which was fun to talk with them. And the Park District was founded with Olmsted's vision of parks for all people, the idea that everyone, regardless of economic circumstance, deserves access to parks. And what I found so inspiring about learning more about Olmsted and the work that he and his son did was that, I knew they were visionaries in terms of setting aside this land for future generations, but I did not know the extent to which they were also passionate about creating access to parks for everyone and not just the wealthy, because, back at that time, some of the folks who had access to beautiful land were only the wealthy. And so they had a real commitment to making it available to everyone. And of course, that is something I'm passionate about and something that the Park District is doing, especially connecting underserved youth through many of the present day district initiatives like Healthy Parks, Healthy People, naturalist programs, and other community outreach programs to help introduce children and their families to nature. And of course, these programs include Parks Express and the Junior Ranger program. And some of you know I was a junior ranger back in the day and experienced firsthand how programs like this do help to create a deep love and appreciation for our natural environment and a long time commitment to preserving it for generations to come. So these programs are important for a lot of reasons. Okay, Point Malate. So before I talk about the Bay Trail, as many of you know, one of my highest priorities is creating a true regional park at Point Malate consistent with the Park District's master plan. And I'm very excited that the state legislature and the governor's office support this vision, and especially appreciate Senator Skinner's successful efforts to get $36 million for Point Malate in the state budget. And there's not a lot that I can say about it publicly right now, but rest assured we are doing everything we need to be doing to make this happen. So stay tuned on that. And on the Bay Trail extension, we are working, as many of you know, in partnership with the city of Richmond to develop a 2.5-mile extension of the San Francisco Bay Trail at Point Malate. And that new trail will connect to the bike pedestrian path on the Richmond-San Rafael Bridge. And the district is the lead on design, permitting, and construction. We plan to construct the entire 2.5-mile project with funding reimbursement from the city of Richmond for its portion of the project costs. And the total project cost is approximately $8.5 million. I'm happy to say that the project is fully funded. And at this point, the Park District, along with partners and stakeholders and the construction management firm WSP Incorporated, are reviewing the final design plans and specifications for the Bay Trail extension at Point Malate. And the Park District, what we're hoping is that the Park District can go out to bid in January of 2023, and pending the bid results, begin construction in spring, summer of 2023. So that's all very exciting. And then the next slide here, the Point Pinole to Point Wilson. This is very exciting because by closing a 0.9 mile, so just less than a mile gap in the San Francisco Bay Trail between Point Pinole and Wilson Point, we can provide a continuous 6-mile segment of Bay Trail from Lone Tree Point in Rodeo to Point Pinole along the San Pablo Bay. We are currently in the preliminary engineering and design phase for this project. And this project, as you can imagine, for many of you have probably been out there, building this trail involves navigating steep topography, avoiding and relocating utility lines, establishing local access, designing boardwalks and bridges over wetlands, and providing for mitigation. And so the Park District hired BKF engineers to assist us in addressing these challenges and to ensure that the future Bay Trail segment is designed to be resilient to sea level rise. And this work is proposed, this preliminary phase is proposed to be completed in the summer of 2023. So now I'm just going to say a few words about the wildfire safety and fuels reduction. And of course, this is a priority that's district-wide. It's one of my highest priorities. And the work is year-round and ongoing. As you know, we don't really, it's pretty much a fire season all year round now, unfortunately. And the Park District maintains a professional fire department with 50 full-time and on-call firefighters. We operate 2 helicopters with firefighting capabilities, maintain 4 remote weather stations that monitor temperature, moisture, and wind to help determine fire dangers. And we partner with CAL FIRE and other local agencies to quickly suppress wildland fires. You all have probably also heard about the sudden tree die-off and die-back, and this involves at least 1,500 acres of sudden tree die-off in our parks. The cost to remove these dead trees is really astronomical. The estimated cost is between 30 to 40 million at Anthony Chabot alone, and to address all the dying and dead trees in Tilden, it would be an additional $10 million. So and it could be even higher, because as climate change continues, we really don't know how many trees will continue to succumb to this. I do want to acknowledge Chief Tiley and her team for being among the first in the state to identify the sudden tree die-off, and really have been leaders in responding to this challenge. And I also want to give a shout out to Senator Nancy Skinner, who got $10 million in the state budget to help us at the Park District to remove dead trees. And then on this next slide, just also want to, this is a great example of how Chief Tiley and her team are leading and innovating on how to address the dead tree problem. Because what this is it's a first of its kind fuels reduction project in California, and it will remove flammable vegetation while also limiting greenhouse gas emissions. And what they will do is use a climate-friendly on-site carbonator to dispose of wood debris and plant matter rather than transporting it off-site. So this will be much more friendly environmentally. And again, it's a first of its kind, and hopefully other areas in the state will follow, and in the country as well, because this problem is likely not going to be just in California. The pilot project is funded by the California Coastal Conservancy, and it's an 80-acre, $2 million project at Anthony Chabot Park. And so, okay, so I've got one more slide in Ward 1, and then you guys are free to ask me any questions you like. So the Park District recently celebrated the 50th anniversary of the Clean Water Act at Dotson Family Marsh in Richmond. And it was really great because we had folks from the EPA, the US EPA, the head of the Cal EPA, and we had a lot of other local leaders and folks to come and celebrate really what we've been able to accomplish in the last 50 years. And certainly Dotson Family Marsh is just a great example of the increasing impacts that we face with climate change. And it's also a great example of how we can get together and address these climate change impacts, including sea level rise. And what I particularly love about Dotson Family Marsh is that it also illustrates how we can come together. And this was really due to the local activists there to preserve and protect open space that's near historically underserved communities. And then, of course, the Park District put in trails that were elevated and visitor improvements to withstand sea level rise, and also designed the marsh restoration to minimize erosion and provide quality habitat, even with anticipated 2080 sea levels. So the Clean Water Act really is something to be celebrated as we continue our efforts to protect the environment and work together towards addressing the increasing impacts of climate change. And so with that, I'm going to stop talking and see if you all have any questions for me. And thanks again for the opportunity to be here.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. Lots of exciting things happening in Ward 1.
Yeah, I think so.
Are there any questions from the members of the PAC?
I do have a comment, if you don't mind.
Sure.
As you were making the presentation, Director Eccles, I was making little notes about things to ask you about. And come the end of the presentation, you'd answered all those things. So
Well, I guess
very
that's good news. I'm glad. Thank you. Thank you for your comment. I appreciate that. Good to hear.
Thanks, Igor. Any other questions or comments? Okay, well, seeing none, thanks again so much for being with us tonight.
Oh, my pleasure. And my background, by the way, is Dotson Family Marsh, for those of you who may not recognize it. So
Nice.
it's a beautiful spot. Yeah. Okay, well, I know you've got a full agenda, so I'm going to let you all move on with it. It's great to see you. Look forward to welcoming Olivia to the board in January. And yeah, have a great, have a great holidays, everybody. Take care.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you. Okay, now on to public comments again. So I think we had one more comment for items not on the agenda from Jim Hansen. Go ahead, Jim.
Great. Sorry about the dark camera here. Hello, and thank you, members of the Park Advisory Committee. I'll be real brief. I just wanted to say that I hope you'll get a chance to read a letter that came from the Equestrian Organization, Bicycle Trails Council of East Bay, Sierra Club, and California Native Plant Society. I'm Conservation Chair for CNPS. And we wanted to make sure that the PAC was aware of this. This is basically to have a sincere concern for a formal public feedback process for the Briones Regional Park pilot project that you heard about a couple meetings ago. And basically we're looking for ways to expand appropriate and enjoyable trail access in the parks, while both protecting natural and coastal resources and minimizing the potential for conflict. And this is just a very great opportunity, particularly if we bring the public in a formal way. And so what we put in the letter was requesting that there be a page on the park website, advertisement for Briones neighbors and stables, signage around the park, a couple public meetings and so forth. So just wanted to alert you to that. And just secondly, to get back to you on the park advisor on the Roddy Ranch plan, the board, I think, heard a lot of your and our concerns. I think one of the things you raised was the oak trees at the ridge top. And we had also brought a letter from 8 organizations, included the 2 Audubon societies, equestrian organizations, Regional Parks Association, Bay Area Outreach, Accessibility Program, CNPS and Sierra Club, basically supporting the ways to look at trails, such as the paved vegetative strip for safe passing, walking only trail at the entrance, and ecologically appropriate oaks at the ridge top. So anyway, they're going to be asking the staff to bring that back in the final design phase. So some of these comments that came up will hopefully be addressed at that time. So I'll just leave it at that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Jim, for those comments and that information. I see Norman LaForce. Did you have a comment for items not on the agenda?
Yes, I do.
Yes, please go ahead.
Fine. I just want to, since Jim mentioned the Sierra Club and the Briones working group, I just wanted to make sure, since I'm present here tonight and speaking on behalf of Sierra Club, that we fully support everything that Jim just said about both Briones and Roddy Ranch, so that my silence would not be assumed to be not supporting that. And secondly, given the time and the fact that I have a 6 o'clock meeting on Zoom, I'm afraid I'm not going to be present to, or I may not be present for your issue about electric bikes. And I just want to say that in commenting on that, it's the position of the Sierra Club that any decision about what to do with electric bikes is going to require a full environmental impact analysis, more than likely a programmatic EIR before that could be approved. Thank you.
Thank you, Norman. Are there any other comments or questions from the public on items that are not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to our next item. So we have several presentations this evening, and as has been alluded to already, we have a very full agenda. So I do want to emphasize that we do have 4 big things to talk about, and so if it's entirely possible that these could go on for a long time, and we might have a late meeting depending how quickly we go through these. The first of the presentations is the role definition, agenda planning, and community partnerships with respect to the role of the PAC. And this is actually an action item, a recommendation, not just informative, as I think was first indicated on the agenda. And so for this item, I'll go ahead and turn it over to Eric Fueler, Chief of Government and Legislative Affairs.
Yeah, thanks, Neil. And I will try to be brief, and I hope people can hear me okay. I'm in I'm not in my normal office, but this is just to bring back to you the definition of the committee's role that the executive committee of the board recommended. So let's get to that. And I'm really it's unfortunate that member Simmons is not in attendance, because the definition that he developed with some input from the PAC was the one that the board executive committee thought was the most succinct and most apt for the role that they see the PAC providing. And you'll notice the community perspectives and advice, community loop, community feedback, those were all terms that were used very frequently. So at the end of this presentation, I would like to take a vote on the PAC recommending this definition move forward to the full board for approval. Next slide, please. And just to quickly talk about how we are thinking about planning agendas for the PAC in the future, and we'll bring this item back for additional input. Tonight is just an introduction, especially given the time constraints that we have this evening. But really, there are 4 main categories of agenda items, and you can read them here. The one that is new is community engagement, or perhaps it should be called strategic engagement. And I'll say a little bit more about that in a minute. Next item. Oh, and I should point out the focused items on that last item are things that are primarily directed by the board. Next slide, sorry, Yuli. And then we have 7 main informational items that the PAC hears every year. Would recommend we continue to have updates on those informational items, but be very limited in what else we add to our agendas. As we are already noting, we have a very full one. So having informational items that are just for information's sake, unless requested by either the board or the PAC, we'd like to limit those in the future. Next slide, please. Community engagement, or as I said earlier, strategic engagement items. These are items really to complete that feedback, community feedback loop that every entity has commented on as a necessary role for the PAC. And it would align our strategic and community engagement with our vision, mission, and priorities. And it will involve community organizations, possibly other agencies, and subject matter experts as well. And we would coordinate these conversations with staff on the Park District's staff who are working with some of these strategic partners throughout the community, and having a conversation with the PAC about some of these important partnerships and engagement opportunities should lead to fruitful discussions about what else could be possible. We've all heard Chair Obringer's comments about how inspirational the naming of Thurgood Marshall Home of the Port Chicago 50 discussion was for her to take back to Concord City council, when they were making a recommendation on naming of the park, would like to continue to have those great community feedback exchanges and continue that great work. And so for this item in the future moving forward, a colleague of the government affairs and legislative affairs colleague of ours, Lisa Baldinger, will be our manager for this item, working with Yuli Padmore to make these exchanges happen. Next item, please. And then the 5 things that the PAC does get asked, and 2 of them are on the agenda tonight, are budget and also the land use plan amendment. And then you can see the other 3 items that will continue to require PAC recommendations. Next slide, please. And then the focused items, as I mentioned earlier, really are those that the board asks the PAC to really have more than one meeting on and really drill down. So obviously the trails discussion, the continuing trails discussion is one. Another one will be the naming policy. And then this is also the category where when we are thinking about if a PAC wants to make a recommendation by a vote of the body to have a focus topic, this would be the category that would fall under as well. Next item, next slide, please. So finally, just to wrap it up, if we could seek a roll call vote on this recommendation for a definition, and that is, I will read this, to provide community perspectives and advice to staff and to the board on the issues, projects, and policies of the Park District. So with that, I would like to turn it over to you, Neil, and any questions, and also we are seeking a motion for support.
Great, thank you, Eric. I see Linda has her hand up. Linda, go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I just, as a point of order, Eric, I think this is great, coming to agreement on the mission statement, but I think the bigger question, are we going to be doing more on some of the other discussion about the PAC role, some of the, other issues that are, how do we balance preservation versus conservation? How do we balance, public engagement's great, but make sure that it's representative of proportionate to park users? Or how do we look at natural priority areas to make sure we have land use maps when we're looking at parks and things? Or some of that stuff still coming back? I felt like we had a very rich conversation, and I'm just trying to understand process of. Besides, I love the statement.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think the conversations that I've had with the leadership team of the PAC and also with our general manager and other folks on staff is that we really need to keep moving pieces of this forward, and that trying to take on entirely reimagining the PAC all in one bite is just a Herculean task. So we wanted to get the basic role definition settled, and then can move on to some of the other items that you suggested. And we do absolutely intend to have continued conversations about how to make sure that those conversations continue.
Thank you.
I see. So I see you were next, but I just wanted to say Bob Simmons has now joined us, and so I want to just acknowledge that the definition that you came up with for the PAC mission before is the one that we're talking about, and so I just wanted to recognize you for that.
Well, thank you for that, both Eric and Neil. And when it's time, I'd love to make the motion.
Sounds great. Okay, Igor.
Thank you. I had a couple of questions, really, I guess. One of them has to do with this fire. When you're going through all the various issues that we are expected to be able to address, I wonder if fire rises to the level of having its own identity of being an issue that we definitely need to focus on. And then the other question was having to do with the role of the PAC members. It's been my understanding, and maybe this is a good time to get it straightened out, that one of our functions is to represent a constituency. I'm supposed to be representative of the interests of special districts, for instance, to the PAC. And is that an expectation, and should that be built in? So I'll leave that to you then.
Yeah, on the wildfire issue, yes, absolutely should be a focus topic. It is the #1 priority of our board and general manager, and it's frankly a public safety emergency. So yes, absolutely, that would be a good topic for focus category. With regard to the role, this is the definition we're considering tonight is the stated role for the body of the Park Advisory Committee. The role of PAC members, we haven't fully gotten to that definition yet, per se, but I will say there is a delineation, at least in my mind, and I think historically, between PAC members that are appointed by 8 entities other than board members. They do represent that organization or suite of organizations in the situation like the mayor's conference. So when Carlin goes back to her mayor's conference meetings, she reports back to them about discussions at the PAC, which I believe is the same thing probably that you do too, Igor, for Contra Costa County Special Districts Association.
Okay, I see Irene next.
Yes, I will graciously let Bob make the motion. But I had a clarifying question for you, Eric. I know that at several of the meetings we talked about that PAC members might want to bring an issue to discuss. So I think that maybe that could go under community engagement, which would be that these items that sometimes originate from PAC members demonstrate partnerships and blah, blah, blah. So I'm not exactly sure where ideas from the PAC members themselves would go under that, but I think that would be a good place to add a little phrase, clarifying phrase.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I in my mind, and we'll continue to have that conversation about how that mechanically will work. In my mind, I was considering it under the focused topic items, similar to when the board asks the PAC to study an issue. If the PAC has an issue they would like to study, asking the board for agreement to do so is what I had envisioned. But if the group wants to have a conversation about that with regard to strategic engagement or community engagement, that would be appropriate, and we will bring that as a separate issue early next year to have a broader conversation about.
Do I understand you correctly then that PAC members, the way you envision it, do not bring items to the committee?
No, I was saying that the category that I saw those kinds of suggestions coming under was the focus topic, but it could also potentially come under strategic community engagement.
Okay, because right now you say that these items are assigned by the board under focus. That's why I didn't know if it went there. So it's just something for you to consider when it comes back, that it really should be spelled out where PAC members can participate with brand new ideas.
Writing it down. Thank you.
All right, thanks, Irene. Any other comments or questions or suggestions from the PAC? I'm seeing none from members of the PAC. So I see Norman LaForce from the public.
Yeah, thank you. I wasn't really expecting to comment on this, but Eric's presentation raised a number of interesting issues. First off, if this is a park advisory committee and is to advise the park district, the members should have the ability and authority, right, however you want to term it, to bring matters to the not only to the PAC, but to the board through the Park Advisory Committee. And I think has to be fleshed out more than has been discussed right now. Irene Dieter's comments are very pertinent to that. You can't have a park advisory committee if it cannot, by its members individually, present ideas, thoughts, comments, and propositions to the Park Advisory Committee and therefore to the board. Secondly, with regard to vegetation management, this is a very important topic. I would just remind members of the Park Advisory Committee that the original, back in the 1990s, when I worked on this issue and helped create the full programmatic EIR for the Park District's full vegetation management program that was implemented at that time, the Park Advisory Committee had virtually no role in that. What was required was a full vegetation management programmatic EIR and program that was ultimately developed. So that is a major topic, as Eric has pointed out, and needs something more than simply a Park Advisory Committee consultation to be fully integrated into what the Park District does, because of the importance of that topic. And finally, I have to say that it's interesting to note that from Igor that the Park Advisory Committee was to somehow represent various constituencies within the Park District. I'm not sure if that was ever its role, but I can tell you that having been involved with the Park District on issues since 1983 as the Sierra Club leader, known to everybody, and I don't say that with a swelled head, that's just the fact, never once was the Sierra Club ever consulted about advising whether anybody from the Sierra Club should be appointed to the Park Advisory Committee. Not once to this day. So if the Park Advisory Committee is to represent constituencies, it needs to broaden its participation among the staff and board with who should be involved. And in fact, the reason for the creation of the Environmental Roundtable was in part due to the fact that the Park District at the time, back in 1998, was not listening to the environmental community on key issues affecting the Park District. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Norman. And I see Virginia Farr. Go ahead.
Yes, if they should also have neighbors on part of the park board, the ones that are directly influenced by where they decide to put the staging areas, like directly across somebody's house. Members of the board, there should be members on the board that have that experience and can explain the impact on their lives, instead of having board members that do not have a park directly across from their house. How many of you have a park 50 feet from your house? Raise your hand. Any of you have a park 50 feet from your house? So one person has a park 50 feet from their house. 2, 50 feet? Okay, I want to know what parks those are, and if that's true that they're exactly 50 feet from your house, and if they're wanted versus unwanted. Thank you.
Thank you, Virginia. Any other comments or questions, suggestions? Okay, so I think at this time we'll entertain a motion for recommending the definition of the Park Advisory Committee's mission.
Okay, Neil, may I be recognized for that purpose?
Sure. You'd like to make that motion?
Sure. I move that the Park Advisory Committee recommend to the board that it adopt or approve the Park Advisory Committee role definition as stated in the agenda report for November 28th, 2022.
I would second that motion.
Was that Dev with the second?
It was Andy.
Oh, Andy, okay.
Oh,
I'll yield to Andy, who spoke. I only put my hand up.
Okay. So motion by Bob, second by Andy. Madam Secretary, could you take the roll call vote, please?
Absolutely. We will start with Marie Arce, Andrew Carey,
Aye.
James Chang,
Yes.
Susie Claxton,
Aye.
Sharon Corkin, Linda Deschambeau,
Aye.
Irene Dieter,
Aye.
Luana Espana,
Aye.
Michelle Lacey,
Aye.
Dev Mahadevan,
Aye.
Rochelle Nathan,
Aye.
Carlin Obringer, Rick Rickard,
Aye.
Alyssa Robinson,
Aye.
Olivia San Wong,
Yes.
Bob Simmons,
Yes.
Igor Skerdoff,
Aye.
Neil Titsui,
Aye.
and I believe William Roland. I don't know if he's still here, but I believe he had to leave early. So motion passes.
Great. Thank you, everyone. And, I think we have a little bit of homework on this too. I mean, for the community engagement items, be thinking of, appropriate or important community partners that we could have present to the PAC or have a conversation with the PAC. And I think those, the contact person for those suggestions is Lisa Baldinger. Is that right, Eric?
Yeah, we'll have a more formal discussion on that in the new year, but she will be managing that aspect of the agenda.
Great, thank you. Okay, and so our next item, oh, I see Virginia's hand. Is that from before, Virginia?
Yes.
Okay. So our next item is the 2023 proposed budget that will be presented by Deborah Spalding, Assistant Finance Officer, and this is also an action item. So I think this year it will be as in previous years. It's presented to us, and we can ask questions and make comments, and then we'll be voting on sending it to the board. But our hope is that for next year, we'll follow a process similar to what we've discussed in previous PAC meetings, where we can maybe have a presentation about the budget beforehand and then have some input and then approve it maybe at a later meeting. So, but this year we'll follow the standard procedure that we followed in previous years. And so I will go ahead and hand this over to Deborah.
All right. Hi, everyone. It's actually going to be a tag team. So you've got three of us here. It's me and then our CFO, Deborah Ocker, and our budget manager, Christina Crosby. So we're going to be taking turns. Oh, so Yuli, you're going to share your screen. Great. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Yeah, Deborah. So Deborah's going to lead us off. I will.
Yeah. Great. Welcome, everybody. I just want to make sure everyone realizes that the PAC Finance Committee met just prior to this meeting. That included Rick Rickard and Olivia San Juan. So they'll be giving you some comments after our presentation. But as most of you know, the budget cycle never ends. We start early in the year. We look at any community surveys that we have. We're looking for, public input. We typically do surveys on an annual basis. The board has study sessions early in the year. And then we also work from the bottom up, taking division requests and needs from the departments. We put that all together in a proposed budget that is approved by the general manager, and that's the proposed budget that we've presented to you. We went to the Finance Committee last week. We're here at the PAC, and we take the proposed budget to the board in December. We provided you with a pretty detailed staff report and a link to the website where the full proposed budget is. I hope you all had a chance to look at that. Next slide. We begin the budget looking at the Park District mission. We're always looking at the Park District mission as we go forward. Next slide. And then this year, as I mentioned, we had several study sessions with the board. We had one where the divisions all put forward the priorities that they saw that were the needs of the district. We also had something called our capital project prioritization, where here at the district, We have lots of different reasons why capital projects move forward, but we want to focus it and kind of rank our projects based on certain criteria. I'll go into that in a little more detail, but we had a workshop talking with the board about what should be that criteria and how would that process work for the future of moving big projects forward. We also met with the board, and they shared the board interests with the staff in order to inform our budget and our priorities. We had a land session and others. So all those board workshops work together. Some of the highlights of those, the input from the board included themes like workforce development and support, wildfire mitigation and prevention, land conservation and expanding public access to nature, and climate smart stewardship and restoration. All those themes move us forward. Next slide. So as the district puts together their budget, we have strong fiscal policies. We're very fortunate to have a balanced budget policy, a finance fund balance, reserve policy, and all these policies help us when we're putting together the annual budget. And they keep us in a strong financial position, even in times of recession or times where recession is looming out there, like now. We continue to use these budget balancing principles as we put together our budget so that we can be financially sustainable and protecting our greatest resource, our employees. We know that these are tax dollars, so as we put the budget together, we keep that in mind. Next slide. We also are very focused on addressing legal and regulatory mandates and looking at our long-term maintenance of our capital assets that we already have. So just mentioning the looming recession, we do know that recessions are cyclical, they're out there, and when we put our budgets together, we're always looking to that. We do have an internal 5-year projections that we put forward, looking at our property tax growth and trying to make sure that we're metering our growth with what we expect. So we have a few more slides on the economics at the end of the presentation, but I just wanted to highlight that as we put our budget together, we are looking at that. Next slide. So here, as we put all of these things together, we're crunching numbers, but we're focusing on, what can be the work plan for the Park District going forward. So some of you that have been here know that these are multi-year projects that take time to go through. So sometimes we have something in our work plan. Sometimes we're appropriating new money to get started on something. So we always start with our budget with our current level of service, and then we see where do we need to grow? What are the needs, based on the external needs, and then what are the needs based on internal needs of the district? And here's some of the highlights that are included in this 2023 budget are included here. We're going to go over the numbers in just a minute when I hand it over to Christina. But increasing public access, we make sure we have staff for that. We're looking at trail connections, opening up new portions of Coyote Hills, finishing the Doolittle Drive project, continuing to work on our McCosker Creek restoration at Sibley, other environmental restorations at Hayward Marsh and the Anthony Chabot Park. And then park safety, as we mentioned, as Elizabeth Eccles mentioned, our hazardous vegetation and fuels reduction programs. The district is always putting our own general funds in there. This year it's 1.3 million to match with these grants that we're very fortunate to have. That's a very big program. Also looking at our public safety air support unit to increase our managing and fighting of wildfires, adding a new fire lieutenant so that we can increase the ability for our fuels crew to work on multiple projects and other efficiencies. Next slide. In park operations, we're always looking at efficiencies of how to do business more efficiently. We have a new park unit that we're adding with a new park unit manager. We're doing some changes to our masked department, our maintenance and skilled trades, by adding an additional unit to really focus on our major maintenance projects and our current assets. And then in the general manager's office, we're including a Office of Equity. A new executive director for the Regional Park Foundation is underway. We're adding staff to human resources and IS, kind of looking at our administrative infrastructure as well as our hard capital infrastructure. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Deb to go through some of the performance goals that we've highlighted in this budget.
All right. So obviously the budget is full of numbers. It's our work plan for the year. And so every division puts forward what its goals are for the year, what it's going to try to achieve. And we've set up this performance measures plan so that all of the goals are tying back to the district-wide goals, and you can see them here. We call this the donut. And so there are 8 different areas where we're focusing our work. So, and I'll dive into them a little bit more, but there are things like plan for climate change resiliency, ensure fiscal health of the district, ensure a safe visitor experience. Next slide, please. So if you look into our budget book, you'll see there's about a page roughly on each of those goals. And so I've just pulled a couple of the goals here and put them into slides so you guys can see some of those projects that people are planning to work on in this year. So here's a picture of the fuels crew working at Anthony Chabot. And so this is one of the projects where we are working on towards climate change resiliency. So beginning treatment of the 300 acres of dead, standing, and drought-stressed trees in Anthony Chabot. And as you heard in Director Eckel's presentation, doing that with a new carbonator so that it'll be really much more environmentally friendly, not just cutting the trees down and carting them off site, but they're going to be converted into carbon that goes right back into the soil. Next slide, please. Here's another one of our goals: to improve access to public parklands and outreach to underrepresented groups. This is a picture of the Doolittle Drive Bay Trail. But then a couple others I wanted to draw your attention to down at the bottom. Our INR staff are planning in the coming year to create a partnership with a local nonprofit to expand the Adventure Crew program out at one of our newest regional parks, Thurgood Marshall. And then the very last one listed here, the INR staff is also going to be working on a web portal for ADA park and trail usage to make it more visible to the public what trails are ADA accessible. Next slide, please. Another one of our goals is to enhance visitors' relationships with nature. And so just a couple examples, we're going to have some new trail posts at Coyote Hills that'll be the Tocheño Trail. And so it'll be really highlighting that cultural group. And then some like really visible projects, planning the Ardenwood Visitor Center remodel, and then designing the Thurgood Marshall home of the Port Chicago 50 Visitor Center. So some really big projects just getting started. Another goal: to balance environmental considerations with outdoor recreational opportunities. Here's a picture of one of our water bottle filling stations. And so it's always a delicate balance for us, finding that we want to have outdoor recreational opportunities for people. We also want to be environmentally considerate. Next slide. You've probably heard a little bit about the 30 by 30 statewide goal. So that falls under this restore, preserve, and protect scenic, natural, and cultural resources goal. And so this is something the whole district is going to be working on in the coming year. So leveraging statewide funding for the 30 by 30 program. Next slide, please. Attracting and retaining a workforce of excellence. One of the big contributions of resources this year is that we're putting funds aside for Peralta Oaks South and Peralta Oaks North to plan for future growth. So that's the very last one listed here. So optimize space at Peralta Oaks South and the Trudeau Training Center also to plan for future staff growth. All right, I'm going to turn it over to Christina here.
Okay. Good evening, Christina Crosby. Now we're going to go over some of the nuts and bolts with some numbers. The proposed budget is $387.6 million district-wide, which includes all appropriations and transfers. This is the largest Park District budget to date, with an increase of over 33% or $97 million. And while this is a large increase, it also really reflects a shift in how we are budgeting. In the previous years, we would generally have a large mid-year appropriation, which was determined generally by our previous year's savings. In the 2022 budget year, we withheld that large mid-year appropriation and instead are budgeting all anticipated expenditures during this annual budget process. This gives us the opportunity to look at all the increases, the changes, the programs, and the projects holistically. And this includes quite a bit of project appropriations that in previous years, as Deborah has already mentioned, would have been brought separately throughout the year. This change explains, at least in part, the significant increase over last year's adopted budget. There is also an increase in debt service this year due to the issuance of new debt in 2022, new bonds. And of course, we have the fact that the Park District continues to grow in general. Okay, next slide. So our total resources for this year's proposed budget is $277 million, of which $226 million is taxes and assessments, $44.3 million is fees and charges, and $2.4 million in contracts and leases, and $4.2 million in philanthropic and miscellaneous. This does not include transfers or use of fund balance in these numbers. Okay, next slide. So I'll go into a little bit more detail on what we were looking at in the previous slide. Our largest portion of resources, over 81%, is made up of taxes and assessments. So $185 million is property tax, and that is our largest chunk. This is an increase of 7.6% over the 2022 projections. General obligation bonds are up to $32.7 million. Due to the new issuance that I just spoke of in 2022, and this revenue goes directly to pay our debt obligations. Measure FF in the lighting and landscape districts is at about $8.5 million, which remains largely the same as last year. Next, we have fees and charges, which focuses on park fees, concession fees, and internal service charges. The largest change in park fees is an increase of approximately $450,000 for the year-round opening of Dumbarton Quarry Campground. Concession fees are pretty much the same, pretty much back to their pre-pandemic level, so there's very little change there. And internal service charges are seeing significant increase of approximately $10 million this year. This is primarily due to a change in our accounting practice where we have shifted the expenses of all the fleet-related charges to an internal service fund model in major equipment replacement fund. So instead of seeing those costs as an operating expense, they will be shown as an internal service charge. This change allows us to capitalize assets appropriately while capturing all fleet-related expenses in a more transparent and comprehensive way. So next we have contracts and leases. This includes communication sites, grazing agreements, and district residences. And then lastly, in the final column is our philanthropic and miscellaneous. First, we have the pension trust. We continue to draw down on our pension trust as we did in 2022, which was created to reduce our vulnerability to volatility in the market. And we also have the aid from the Regional Park Foundation in this category at approximately $1.1 million. Okay, next slide. So next up, we have appropriations. Our total appropriations is $330 million, which is up 29% over the prior year of $256 million. This includes $190 million in operating, which is largest by far, and then $52.7 million in projects, which we discussed is larger than previous years due to our efforts to include all appropriations during this annual budget process. Internal services is at $33 million, which is also a reflection of a change in our practice to reflect our expenses related to fleet as an internal service charge. And we have special revenue at 14.6, which we saw a decrease primarily in Measure WW local grant appropriations by about 5 million. And then lastly, we have debt service increased significantly to a little under 39 million from the 14 million in 2022 due to the new issuance in 2022. Okay, and so on this slide here, I really want to point out that the bulk of the district's appropriation is committed to service delivery. So you see the 46.7% for personnel and 26% for supplies and service. And I am going to turn it back over to Deborah, where she can talk a little bit more about the personnel.
Thank you. Thank you, Christina. So next slide. Included in this budget, we also have, like I said, growth in our personnel, 40.35 additional full-time equivalent positions. Some of those, 9.35, have to do with new park openings to make sure that we have field staff, we have stewardship and public safety to open new areas. And then we also have a practice of upgrading 9-month positions to full-time. We're no longer a seasonal park district. We are busy all year round. And so we've had a practice over the last 4 or 5 years of just transitioning some of our seasonal, where we used to furlough staff, to now be full-time. Also changing some seasonal staff to full-time are included in this. Next slide. So here's the breakdown. You can see it's spread out throughout lots of different divisions. Operations division, being our largest, that serves all of our parks, is getting 25 additional staff. Public safety is getting about 3.5 additional full-time equivalent staff. Next slide. And you can see we have this growth trajectory as the park grows, as our acreage grows, as our visitors grow in numbers. We are increasing our staffing to serve all of those. So we had a little bit of a hold during the pandemic where we had a lot of uncertainty, and now we're just kind of catching up and making sure that we're accommodating all the needs. So that's our staffing picture. I just have a few slides on projects. So next slide. Overall, we have a pretty big project budget. As I said, it covers multi-years. I mentioned that the board adopted a capital project prioritization policy. This we score the different projects that are coming new based on equity, whether it's enhancing public access, climate preparedness, partnerships, which is additional funding, as well as, if we're working in other jurisdictions, operating efficiencies, health and safety, whether there's multiple uses for this project, whether it's addressing multiple issues, extending useful lives, project readiness, all those things are ranked. 135 is the highest ranking, and you can see down here on the bottom of each of the pages in our volume 2 capital project budget. If it is a capital project, it would get a score. This one is 105 for this Alameda Point project, which is really just finished already. Some of the scores you see an E for essential. That is that we've determined that this project needs to be completed for legal or regulatory or safety issues, and rather than scoring it, we're just saying we need to move this forward. So those are kind of the prioritization. Our total budget is it's pretty balanced, right? We have a lot of funding going towards potential land acquisition. We have public access projects, resource enhancement projects, infrastructure projects, all adding up to the total project budget. There's about 48 million new projects, and included in the whole project budget is over it's $433 million in total, including all of the revenue sources. Next slide. So some of the new funding going forward in this budget, as we mentioned, we used to fund some of these long-term needs at our mid-year budget cycle, but now we're trying to incorporate that all into the annual budget cycle. So you can see some big dollars for habitat preservation, infrastructure maintenance. We have a big amount for technology and workspace improvement. As Deborah mentioned, a lot of that's going to plan for future staffing needs, including public safety and administrative headquarters. I think maybe somebody needs to be muted. Thank you. And then we have other projects that, as we said, we set our work plans and we said, what is the annual need for these projects? These are not the complete project costs, but they're what we thought we needed to move forward for 2023. And then we'll come back in the next cycle. Once we finish the design, then we come back for construction, things like that. Next slide. So just highlighting a few of the items that are in here. At Black Diamond Mines, we have analyze the timber, and there are certain areas where we need to replace the timber. So we're putting forward $300,000 for that project. It's an estimated $4 million project. Coyote Hills, this is the restoration and public access project of the new Patterson property, the largest donation to the Park District. That's underway, and it's fully funded, $18 million. We're adding another $360,000 in this budget to get it fully funded. Next slide. At the Hayward Marsh, this is a very large project that's portioned off. We have in this budget $745,000, which is adding to the $1.3 million that already exists. We're continuing work on pre-design in this project. Next slide. And Oyster Bay, we continue to work on the public access. We put a lot of recreational amenities out there. We're going to continue to work on opening up an access off of Neptune Drive to the new staging area here. And we put in the remaining WW funds of $1.4 million for that. Okay, so I'm going to turn it back over to Deb Spalding. We just have a couple more slides just to talk about the economy and how it sits out there. Deb.
Yep. So I think a lot of us are wondering. So we start working on our budget in July and August, and then the economic picture for the coming year is like becoming more and more clear as we go through the year. So just giving you like more recent economic information, just so that you know that we are thinking about this, and we do our best. We make our plan. I think it was General MacArthur who said, like, the plan is nothing, but planning is everything. So we have worked on our plan. We're presenting it as the budget. But the fact that we've done this planning is really the point of the exercise, so that we can come back during the year and make changes as needed. So most recently, the federal, sorry, I wasn't quite done. The Federal Reserve has been trying to taper down the inflation by increasing interest rates. And the latest quote from Chair Powell from the Federal Reserve said, I think the inflation picture is just becoming more and more challenging. And so the path to having a soft landing, it's going to be harder for them to get there. The soft landing meaning like not throwing the country into a recession. So we hope that won't happen. And they're saying it's becoming more challenging as the year goes on, as inflation is really being so far been pretty resistant to their efforts. However, from the State Legislative Analyst's Office, they just put out a report very recently, and so their projections are not incorporating a recession. So they're suggesting that the legislature begin planning without wanting to dig into the general reserves, the general purpose reserves. And that's just comparing it to last year, when last year's projections were like revenues are growing at historic rates. So we're not there right now, but we're also, the state is not planning for a recession. Next slide. But the LAO did say, should a recession occur, revenues could be like 30 to 50 billion below what they're projecting. So they're recommending that the legislature identify recent augmentations to pause or delay. So the Park District has received some of those augmentations for some of our projects. So we really want to get moving on those, show that we have projects ready to go, so that they don't come to us and say, hey, give that money back to us, or we're not going to give it to you for a few years. We want to be able to get that money and put it to use right away. I think there's one more slide. Yeah, so every year we work with Beacon Economics, and they are a really well-known company that works throughout the state to do economic projections. And so they give us a projection that we can use for the second half of our calendar year, because we only have the revenue projections for property taxes for the first half of the year. So their projection for the 23-24, the second half of of next year of 2023 is you can see they give us a low projection, a baseline projection, and a high projection. So on the left-hand side, you can see that their baseline projection for next year, for the second half of the year, is a 5% growth. And then the graph here is showing the projection they gave us this year as compared to the projection they gave us last year. So the blue line is their latest projection. You can see we're starting out with like almost 8% growth was their projection for this year. And then if you look at next year, they're saying, okay, maybe it's about 5% growth. And then if you look further out, their projection for 24-25 is really like 2.5%. Not a this is property tax revenue that we're talking about. So they're not projecting that it's going to be negative growth, but the growth is going to be smaller in the coming years. I think that's the last slide that I'm going to take. Hand it back to Deborah.
Okay, so as we mentioned before, we do look at all of those projections as we build our budget. Sometimes things hit governments a little bit later. So we look for that, those things in the coming year. So we had as I mentioned, we had our finance committee meeting. We're here tonight, ready to answer any questions that you might have. And then we will go to the board of directors in December. We have our first meeting as a night meeting where we introduce the budget and have a public hearing. Then we ask the board of directors to adopt the budget on December 20th. And that's all we have tonight.
Great. Thank you all for that presentation. As always, very excellent, very thorough. So I think I had a question last year and about, what are the sort of contingency plans for if expenses, sort of exceed what they were anticipated for at the beginning, or if there are other sort of, shortfalls in the budget. And I think you said that one of the sort of areas of flexibility that the park district has is one-time projects. Is that sort of the top of the list if circumstances arise in which we need to trim somewhere?
Absolutely. A lot of our budget does include one-time projects that we can determine the timing of. And so we can control some of our spending in that area. Also, a typical thing to do is just slow the rate of hiring slightly so that we're not freezing hiring, but we're just slowing down so that we can see where the economy's going. Those are two areas.
Great,
I'll just add to that. So each quarter we bring to the finance committee and then to the full board our quarterly revenue and expenditure report. So we are having those opportunities to check in and talk to the board about how things are turning out.
Okay, great. I see Dev has his hand up. Dev? You're still muted, Dev.
Thank you. Yeah. It doesn't say specifically, but I believe we are on a calendar year, so.
That is correct.
So
yes, January
that's
through
the
December.
mid-year issue. Most public agencies, like the state, for in June 30th. The other is that your share revenue is at 277, and appropriations, I gather, is a combination of expenses and capital and others. So it's higher. So the more like $53 million difference. So there's the balancing comes from paying for capital separately. So you account for that.
This budget, we are, thank you for recognizing that. We are using our reserves. So as we mentioned in the past, we have kind of done a mid-year cycle budget amendment where we say, how did we end the prior year? What can we appropriate those funds for one-time purposes that are addressing long-term needs of the district? And we wrapped that process into our annual budget this year. So part of it is one-time general funds that we're drawing on reserves. Part of it is drawing on bond money or other funds that were already set aside for projects.
Which, just to clarify that, so essentially that reserve is from past surpluses. Presumably.
Correct. That is correct.
Thank you.
Igor?
Yes, thank you. This is a quite an impressive piece of, I don't know what you might call it, organized presentation of a lot of detail, and yet still showing the bigger picture. One part of the picture I'd like to ask about is, I understand that the Park District is embarked on an ongoing effort to try to enhance the Native American connection. Not sure exactly what to call that, but to increase the sensitivity towards the Native American point of view and their heritage and the sacred sites and all that sort of thing. And I was wondering, is there anything specifically in the budget that's earmarked for that kind of work?
There are actually some professional services that are set aside for cultural and natural resources work, specifically in that area, and monitoring in cultural and natural resources. That is a new item in the budget.
Okay, thank you.
Linda?
Yeah, hi there. I just had a quick question because I was trying to look back and forth between the staff report and I saw a 55.2% increase in supplies and services. Is that actually the staff you're talking about, the 40 new staff that we see, and yet the graph seemed very consistent and incremental along the way? That's my first question. And then I'll just be a dunce because I don't understand it, and maybe you touched on it and I missed it, but the comment in the staff report about 182.8% in debt service, that includes the debt service for the 2022 measure WW bonds. I just wonder if you could touch on that again for me. There's a lot to absorb here.
That's great. Yes, I do appreciate the follow-up question so we can give a little more detail. So supplies and services include a lot of just ongoing operating and maintenance, but they also include things like design and engineering and permitting. And so since we have a focus on projects this year, the majority of that increase is kind of in those other professional services area where we do contract out for certain design and engineering and permitting for our big projects. Deb, is there anything else that you can recall that was a big increase?
We have, if you ever feel like really diving into the detail, I pulled up the budget book here. And so this is, oh gosh. I don't have the page number here, but we look at each line item and we explain what the increase is really from. So so if you want to go to that book, you can see what some of the increases are. And
yeah.
Have the wait, hold on. No, I don't have the page number on this version. Sorry.
But we do also, under some of the other services, we've put a lot of funding into grazing infrastructure. That's new in the last couple of years. At mid-year, we put some, we have a great need for fencing and water infrastructure that has to do with the fuels management grazing program. So that is some new additions in this budget as well.
Okay, I found it. Page B. It starts on page B36.
Yeah.
And so you go through every line item and say, okay, this increase is related to like purchasing new computer equipment. This line item is we're purchasing a new boat for something. So
yeah, and Deb did mention the computer equipment. That's another part of supplies and services that we are seeing, that technology is much more important now than it used to be, with all of us needing, cameras and devices and all that. So making sure that everybody has the right technology. So those are some of them. And then if that's okay, I'll go to the debt service question. We typically layer our bonds, and every 4 to 5 years, we do a new issue. So sometimes our debt service is doubled up, and we have several issues that we're paying the principal and interest on. And so there's a revenue side to that and an expenditure side, right? The voters approved an extra tax to pay for these bonds. So that's the revenue side, the debt levy side. and we match that to what's owed. So every year that can change based on our actual debt service schedules. And since we just issued these new bonds this February, we typically do a big chunk of principal payoff early in the life of the bonds. And so that's reflected in this 2023 budget. And just in the past couple of years, we had paid off all of our Measure AA bonds. And so our debt service had really kind of gone down. And now we're just, with that new debt issuance, it bumped it up again. So that's kind of trying to explain that growth. It's on the payment side. The funding that we get goes into the projects, and we get to spend it on all these great things that the voters approved, all these public access projects that we have going forward.
Thank you so much for putting those two things in quick, easy to understand layman terms. Thank you.
Rick?
Yes, thank you, Neil. As Deborah mentioned, Olivia and I met before this meeting with staff, the finance staff, as the finance subcommittee, and reviewed the budget and discussed it with staff. We found, as they always seem to do, that it's a prudent, well-written budget document, particularly supportive of the capital project prioritization and the fact that they've moved the entire capital expenditure estimates into the full year budgeting. And on that basis, we are prepared to propose to make a motion to the full PAC that we recommend approval of this budget to the full board.
Okay, I will credit you with that motion. So Rick has a motion. Is there a second? I see Dev has the second. Madam Secretary, could you take the roll call vote, please?
Yes. Let's start with, I believe, Andrew Carey.
That would be an aye.
James Chang.
Yes.
Susie Claxton.
Yes.
Linda Deschambeau. Sorry.
Yes.
Thank you. Irene Dieter.
Yes.
Luana Espana.
Yes.
Michelle Lacey.
Yes.
Dev Mahadevan.
Yes.
Okay. I think you said yes. Rochelle Nason.
Yes.
Rick Rickard.
Yes.
Alyssa Robinson.
Yes.
Olivia San Wong.
Yes.
Bob Simmons.
Yes.
Igor Skerdoff.
Yes.
And Acting Chair Neil Titsui.
Yes.
Yes, I just wanted to note and highlight that it is now 5:44. So if we can politely ask our next presenters, I know it's a robust presentation for both, but if you could keep it as brief as possible, and perhaps we can see how we can prepare these any questions for our presenters in advance. Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Appreciate it.
Great. Thank you. And so our next item is the public hearing for the Southern Las Trampas Land Use Plan Amendment Draft Environmental Impact Report. And I believe Kim Tai, Senior Planner, is presenting this. Go ahead, Kim.
Yes. Thank you. Good evening. Kim Tai, Senior Planner with the Planning, Trails, and GIS Department. Let me go ahead and share my screen. I believe it's already shared. Please let me know if you can see the screen.
Looks good. Looks good,
Thank
Kim.
you. I'm excited to be bringing to you today this project, the 756-acre Southern Las Trampas Wilderness Regional Preserve Draft Land Use Plan Amendment, or the LUPA, and the Draft Environmental Impact Report, EIR. I'm asking the PAC today to be recommending to forward to the full Board of Directors this project for consideration. This will also be a public hearing for the project's draft EIR under the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA. We will be taking public comments on the project and the environmental analysis for the project. Comments on the draft EIR and the response to comments will be included in the final EIR that will be going to the board for certification, for consideration sometime in January or February. I'll be going over an overview of the project, including the background and recommendations, the CEQA process itself, and the recommendation to the PAC today, followed by the public hearing. To give an overview of the project location, outlined in yellow on the map is the project area. It's in the southern portion of Los Trompas. It's surrounded by the town of Danville, city of San Ramon, and unincorporated Contra Costa County. I wanted to give a broad overview of the full history of the project area before the history of the park district's involvement in the parcels. So going back as far back as 13 million years ago, there were large predators and mastodons, such as the ancient elephant Gomphotherium, as well as pictured here, the saber-toothed cats in the area roaming. Then fast forward to about 8,000 to 3,000 years ago, there were foragers and hunter-gatherer, rather than settling more mobile throughout San Francisco Bay Area, including the project area. I also do want to acknowledge that this area was identified, that the Bay Miwok speaking Tatcan people were identified to have held the area west of Mount Diablo, and it includes portions of the Las Trompas Ridge, San Ramon Creek, Bollinger, and Sycamore and Green Valley Creeks. This marker that you see here is acknowledgement of the Tatcan people, and it's located in Alamo. In 1770s, during the Spanish period, the Spanish established missions. Mission San Jose, located in Fremont, used the project area for grazing purposes. Then in 1821, during the Mexican period, the project area was part of the Rancho San Ramon. And again, this area was heavily used for cattle ranching. In this picture in the far top right corner, you can see an example of the cattle ranching that was in the Wiedemann Ranch nearby. Then from the 1900s to today, cattle ranching continued, followed by orchards were known. San Ramon Valley was known for orchards, specifically also pears and walnuts, as seen here in the ad for the Bartlett pears. Then about 1940s to today, the orchards kind of slowly gave way to more residential development in the area. So fast forward to now, the history of the timeline of the Park District involvement. I wanted to kind of show how these properties and parcels came together to make it right for this area to need a land use plan amendment. Starting in 1983, the 58-acre Peters Ranch parcel was dedicated to the Park District as a condition of approval for residential development called the California Chateau. This was also around the time that the town of Danville was incorporated. So for a long time, this parcel, the Peters Ranch, sat disconnected from the larger Las Trompas. The goal was eventually to provide public access up to the Las Trompas Ridge. Then in 2007, the Park District acquired in fee the 228-acre Chen parcel. At the time, the landowners had proposed residential development on the property, but instead, by acquiring this property with the intent to provide a staging area and a trail up to the Las Trompas Ridge, the Park District was able to retain the semi-rural character of the area and the property along Bollinger Canyon Road. In 2015, the 232-acre Elworthy property was dedicated to the Park District as, again, a condition of approval for residential development at Bell Ridge, kind of closer to the San Ramon Valley Boulevard. As part of that dedication of the open space, there was also a 12-car staging area, followed by a trail from that staging area up to the Las Trompas Ridge. Because that was all constructed by the developer, and environmental analysis was conducted as well, and it was considered safe and suitable for public access. It was open to the public in 2015. In 2018, the Park District acquired the 96-acre Padva property, also as a condition of approval for residential development, the Red Hawk project. 30 acres of that 96 acres is under a conservation easement for the additional protection of sensitive habitat and species. From that property, the Park District also has a walk-in entrance with some on-street parking off of Wingfield Court. And then from that walk-in entrance includes a trail from there up into that connects to the existing open parkland in Las Trampas. Has been constructed and it's also completed with the environmental analysis and it's currently in land bank, but it will be opened as proposed as part of this project. And then finally, the Park District is anticipating accepting the 141-acre Faria parcel located on either side of Bollinger Canyon Road. This is actually as a stipulation of a settlement agreement between the City of San Ramon and the Park District in conjunction with the Sierra Club for the Faria Preserve residential development located adjacent to the project area. And I will be discussing the details of that in the next following few slides. So part of the recommendations for the project included in the 756-acre project, we will be opening again the land bank properties, the Peters Ranch, the Chen, and the Padva for a total of about 383 acres. The Faria property will be remaining in land bank once accepted. And the Elworthy, again, is already open to the public. The project also proposes providing 4.2 miles of recreational trails to be open for public access. I'll have a breakdown of those trails in the following slides. The project proposes 3 new park access points shown here in the purple stars. So one is one new staging area. It's a 25-car staging area located on the Chen parcel right along Bollinger Canyon Road. This staging area will be constructed by the Faria residential developer as also part of the settlement agreement. The staging area will include 1 vault toilet, information panel, and a few benches. Let's see here. We propose to name it Old Time Corral Staging Area as a nod to the existing cattle ranching history and also use of the cattle corral at the property. The staging area will be proposed to be constructed at an existing cattle corral area. Since it's relatively flat and good sight lines, the cattle corral itself will be shifted north adjacent to the proposed staging area. The other 2 park access points include 1 walk-in entrance from with on-street parking from the Padva property. That's proposed to be called the Padva walk-in entrance. And from there, the trail going into the open parklands in Las Trampas is proposed to be named the Heritage Pear Trail as a nod to the orchards of the San Ramon Valley, and also because there's an existing pear tree on the property as part of a remnant orchard. And finally, the third park access point is a new walk-in entrance from the Faria Preserve residential development, continuing into the Calaveras Ridge Trail extension here. And this is proposed to be called the Saudade walk-in entrance. This is a term as a nod to the Portuguese community that lived in the area. Saudade is a term to mean nostalgia or deep belonging. It was a term that Rose Emery Peters, wife of Joe Peters from Peters Ranch, used this term to describe her childhood and growing up in the San Ramon Valley with the cattle ranching history. So the project also designates 201 acres as a special resource protection area. So that includes, seen in the highlighted in orange, the Faria dedication, that's the conservation easements, as well as the conservation easement within the Padva property, as well as a 35-acre wetland complex within the open existing parkland. And these are to provide additional protection and management of some sensitive habitat and for the protection of special status species. And the Park District, the project also recommends to designate 99% of the project area as a natural unit, and natural unit as defined in the master plan to mean an open space area with lower intensity for recreation, with the goal of preserving and enhancing natural habitat, which means 1% of the area is for recreation, such as the staging units, the staging areas. And so this does make it consistent with the designation of Las Trampas as a wilderness regional preserve. So overall, the project does provide benefits by achieving the Park District's dual mission of preserving open space and natural resources while providing recreational opportunities. It does close the gap along the Calaveras Ridge Trail, highlighted in the yellow. The portion that's on that's part of the project area that goes through the Peters Ranch will be connecting an existing portion of Calaveras Ridge along the ridge, and then into the portion of Calaveras Ridge that would be constructed on the FRIA residential developers portion of the property. And then this project is able to connect residents from the town of Danville and San Ramon closer to Las Trampas. And I do want to provide a preview of the conceptual trail alignments through this project area using this drone footage. 1 second. So we wanted to show the 0.9 mile Calaveras Ridge Trail extension. So starting off, as you see here from the existing Ridge Trail, the alignment goes through the Peters Ranch property through open grassland. Our trails team prioritized avoiding drainages, ravines, sensitive habitat, fall lines in order to determine a more sustainable trail, while also providing trail users with a varied trail experience. Park users will be able to have views of Mount Diablo, San Ramon Valley, as well as Rocky Ridge and Bollinger Canyon. And it will provide some shade relief by taking users through the wooded area as seen here. And though the width of the trail is expected to be less than 8 feet wide, as you can see in this footage, there will be sufficient room for multiple trail users to be able to cross paths. This drone footage does provide kind of a good preview of the topography of the project area, but it also shows and highlights some of the site constraints of the project area, just some of the steep portions of the trail alignments as largely unavoidable. And then seen here, it connects into the walk-in entrance, the Saudade, into the FRIA residential development. So in breaking down the trail recommendations, of the 4.2 miles of trails to be proposed for to open for public access, 1.4 miles of that will be already existing. So that's shown in the dotted blue line. And all it is it will be proposed to be open for public access. That's the Heritage Paratrail. 2.8 miles is proposed as new construction. So that includes the Sabertooth Trail from the Old Time Crawl staging area up to the Las Trampas Ridge. That will be the 1.1 mile new multi-use road. That'll be wide enough for emergency vehicles and maintenance access. And it also, the 2.8 miles of new construction will also include the Warbler Loop Trail on the Chen property, as well as the extension, the 0.9 mile extension of the Calaveras Ridge Trail that you had seen during the drone footage. In going over the CEQA process for the project area, we held a public scoping meeting in which we received community input. From there, we prepared an initial study with our consultants in order to determine the level of environmental review needed for CEQA, and it was determined that it would be an EIR, Environmental Impact Report. We released a notice of preparation and initial study out for public review for 30 days, and we received public comments from that. And using the public input, we were able to prepare a draft environmental impact report. The EIR analyzes potential environmental impacts of the proposed projects on environmental resources such as air quality, aesthetics, biological resources. The EIR determined that the proposed project would not result in any significant impacts. All potential impacts are reduced to less than significant with mitigation measures. The EIR is currently available along with the land use plan amendment for review at the Peralta Oaks Park District headquarters, as well as Danville Library, San Ramon Library, and on our park website. All comments will be incorporated into the final EIR package with the responses to those comments, and that will be going to the board for consideration at the time that they certify for the certification of the EIR. And this shows a few of the public engagement that have occurred for this project. The ones highlighted in the red boxes pertain to CEQA, so that did include the public scoping meeting, the 30-day public review for the notice of preparation, as well as we're currently in the 45-day public review period for the draft EIR that started on October 31st and will end on December 14th. And we're here now at the PAC. Public hearing, for the EIR. Previously, we went to the board executive committee and it was recommended to be forwarded to the full board for consideration. The meeting for the board hearing is to be determined, but likely January or February. So staff today recommend that the PAC forward a recommendation to the full board of directors to consider certification of the draft environmental impact report and adoption of the land use plan amendment for the Southern Las Trampas Wilderness Regional Preserve. And I can take any questions, and we'll also have a public hearing for the project EIR. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Kim, for the excellent presentation. It's really exciting to see all these pieces come together and make this nice contiguous piece of open space. And I know it's been a long time coming also. So thanks for presenting that. I see Irene has her hand up. Irene?
Hi, yes. Thank you for the presentation. I have a question about process. I'm feeling a little uncomfortable about recommending this to the board when the public comment period is still open. And I think it would be helpful for PAC members to actually read responses in order to make an informed decision. So is this the way it normally works, that it's forwarded on before the EIR process is finished?
Hi, Irene. I will jump in on there. Thank you very much. I'm Brian Holt, Chief of Planning, Trails, and GIS. And first want to thank and recognize Kim for what's been really great staff work on this project for a number of years. This is the process, Irene, and it's really really two separate processes, two separate documents. We have a land use plan amendment, and what we're asking the Park Advisory Committee to evaluate is really what the proposed project is, what the proposed plan is. The CEQA evaluation, the CEQA document, the environmental review, is separate. And of course, the PAC members all have opportunities to provide comments on the CEQA document as part of the public process. And all of those comments will be responded to in the final EIR, and that full package will be considered by the full board. So the Park District has often gone through the PAC to receive comments on the CEQA document, but what we're asking for is a recommendation on the proposed plan. So for a little historic context, the PAC would often wrestle with what is the level of recreation versus preservation in these land use plans, and that's where a lot of the PAC comments would come in. So we're not asking you to evaluate the CEQA analysis and evaluate the quality of the environmental review that goes through the CEQA process. We're asking you to take comments from the public on the CEQA analysis and then make a recommendation on the actual plan.
So let's see, what this report says: recommend that the EIR and the land use plan amendments be forwarded to the board of directors for consideration.
Correct.
So I'm just thinking of the optics here. I realize, I've commented on EIRs before. It just seems like the cart before the horse.
I would offer that it's pretty common in city governments to have a planning commission host a hearing and receive comments. And all of those comments that are received during a planning commission meeting are then are wrapped into the sort of the administrative record for comments. And then it goes to the city council for certification of the EIR. So our process is entirely consistent with how municipalities throughout the Bay Area handle such discretionary actions.
Okay, well, I guess just for me personally, I learn a lot by reading the comments, and I may have been able to bring some insight into our discussion after reading them, but I will let that be. I have one question: is there's going to be new multi-use trails? Did I understand that they're going to be less than 8 feet wide?
So, Kim, I'll just jump in on that too, since we're on there. So what we have attempted to do here is, well, the majority of the new trail system is existing roads. So those are more than 8 feet wide. There are 2 trails that are proposed for construction. And we say trails because they're less than 8 feet wide. So they're designed for recreational use and not vehicular use. The Warbler Loop Trail would be parallel to EVMA Road. So that's one where you could pick and choose your adventure, I guess you could say. You could take the road up or you could take the trail up. And then the Calaveras Ridge Trail extension is proposed to be a trail. And that's the video that you saw the drone footage of. So part of the reason why we took that drone footage is we were hoping to show to you that the challenge of building, say, an 8-foot wide trail through that landscape. It really needs to be a minimal footprint and a narrow trail. We're not making trail use recommendations here. We need to get the thing built, and then you know it is, you know, that trail is kind of where it is because that's where it can be, and it's as wide as it can be. I would suggest it would be a challenging trail to restrict access to because it does connect essentially 2 roads on either side, and it connects into a neighborhood. But that'll be a discussion that we hope to bring forward to the board to make a trail use determination at a time when, you know, we have the design refined and we're able to get the thing permitted and built and move forward, because we don't have the ability to make that trail wider. So we have options to restrict use, but that's right now those are social issues. We're really focused on the environmental issues pursuant to CEQA, and that's what we're evaluating as part of the CEQA document.
So the trails that are less than 8 feet wide, they're not being designated multi-use yet at this stage.
Well, multi-use could mean hiker and horse only. That's multi-use.
Mm-hmm.
So
okay.
We are designating them as multi-use. We're not suggesting that any particular use be banned at this time, but certainly that could be considered as a future trail use determination.
Okay, thank you.
Igor?
Hi, I was basically intrigued by the drone, how the drone flew along and drew the trail on the terrain down below. That was very cool. One of the things that brought up as a question was I noticed that there were several existing roads that the trail did not follow, that went a different way. And so I was wondering, what was the plan for those roads? Would they be decommissioned? Would they be converted to something else? And the other question I had was, are there provisions in these plannings for roads and trails to accommodate firefighting equipment going up there to actually deal with any fires that might happen?
Hi, I can speak to those 2 questions. Thank you. In terms of the existing ranch roads, so you did notice that there was already an existing trail on the Chen property as well as some within the Peters Ranch. So we had our trails team go and determine a line, and because portions of the existing ranch road would largely be unsustainable just because it would be like a fall line. So those portions were rerouted to be more sustainable. They did use, as part of the new conceptual trail alignment, where possible, the existing ranch road where possible. So any portion that will not be part of the new proposed trail, that will be closed for public access.
Will the train road be removed or somehow made unrecognizable as a road in this case?
Oftentimes what our operations staff would do is scarify like the first few hundred feet so that trail users cannot see from the trail that's public access, the old ranch road, so that it will not be used. So it will be closed in that way, as an example of how it will be closed. As for your second question about firefighting, yes, so the Sabertooth Trail that's proposed to be from the Bollinger, the staging area, the Old Time Corral along the Bollinger Canyon, that's one of those trails that's proposed to be wide enough to accommodate emergency vehicles and maintenance access. So the emergency vehicles does cover firefighting vehicles, and that largely helps to be able to get staff, operations, maintenance, and also emergency vehicles up to the Las Trampas Ridge at a faster and reduced response times.
Yeah, thank you.
Bob.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you, Kim, for a very fascinating report. Couple questions. One is just basic because I like to hike. When are the trailheads going to be open if it goes along the process that you think it's going to go on? And the second, and building on something that Igor said earlier in the day, I think both this and the Tyler Robertson opening, and I've hiked that recently opened place twice now. I don't think I saw, and I see good references, and this is a naming question, good references to the settlers, the ranchers, the Portuguese. I don't know that I've seen much in the way of recognizing through names of the first peoples that lived in the area. And so it's more of a, I can see you're not going to change it for here, but it is. I hope the Park District will take another look at its approach to its naming and recognize that there needs do something to recognize the first peoples that lived in the area with some of the names in an appropriate way. That's more of a comment than a question. I'm sorry about that, but I did have a question at the beginning, if you remember that, which was really, when are the trails going to be open for somebody like me to get out there?
Thank you for those questions. So the first one about kind of like when will they be open? So in terms of next steps, so following the project approval and EIR certification, the next step is to work on the permitting, and kind of depends on how long the regulatory agencies kind of provide the permits.
Okay.
But following that, then we'll be able to go out and do construction. So internally, the trails will be constructed alongside the construction of the staging area. And then, so that could take, it just depends on the permitting. I don't have an exact timeline for that yet. And then in terms of the naming, I do want to acknowledge that. Thank you. So in terms of the naming process for the proposals for this project area, we had internal naming kind of process. We went through the different proposals based on history and geography. And it did include some Indigenous related names. But in going over some of the two names we did take a look at, we wanted it to be a more thoughtful and nuanced process. Some of the names carry a lot of historical weight, and we wanted to give it full deference. We didn't want to kind of like tie it to like a walk-in entrance, for example. And so I think it needs to be part of a larger conversation, a larger process. And And we do also acknowledge that naming is one way to honor and acknowledge Native heritage and history of the land. So we'll have to look at kind of all the ways to do that, in addition to just naming trails or walk-in entrance or other facilities.
Yeah, thanks, Kim. I just wanted to jump on the native naming issue real quick and just provide a little bit of perspective, because I appreciate the comment. I also appreciate that you've hiked the Robertson Trail twice, so that really tells me something about your fitness there. So good job, because it's a heck of a hike up there. We have had this conversation a number of times, and of course it came up around the Thurgood Marshall naming, and appreciated your comments on the Robertson Tyler Ranch as well. And our cultural services coordinator, Anna Marie Gonzalez, works very closely with local tribal communities, and we get a lot of feedback on that. So I guess I'd just say it's recognizing Native American history on the property is it's a little bit more challenging than just sort of identifying a name and putting it on there. It's really a relationship that we have with Native people, and identifying the ways that they want to be recognized and the ways that they want to have their history recognized. So we look forward to that feedback, and we're open to it. But we've often heard the refrain of hey, we want something more than a trail named after us, or don't just sort of do that. So it's an ongoing conversation, and something that we definitely share the interest in, and we'll keep it going. So
thank you.
Bob, I also did want to follow up on your first question of the next steps. I forgot to mention that while the construction is still kind of like to be determined and need permitting, the Podva walk-in entrance and the trail, the Heritage Pear Trail, has already been constructed and has gone through environmental secret review. So yep, it's open following the project's approval. That can be open immediately as early as next year.
Okay, thank you.
And I see that Kelly has his hand up, but I want to finish up with PAC member comments before I get to public comments. So go ahead, Igor.
Thank you. I apologize for double dipping here, but something I've heard just recently during this set of discussions triggered a question in my mind when we were talking earlier on about the PAC itself. And I wonder, and one of the aspects of that was that we, to some degree at least, represent a constituency. Is there a designated constituency of Native American flavor that maybe should be represented on PAC directly, rather than have someone like me who's trying to catch up and learn as much as I can, but someone who's had that as actual part of their heritage? Would we want to consider a place on PAC for somebody to represent that kind of aspect of it?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting suggestion, but probably beyond the scope of what we're talking about tonight. I think it's
right.
A topic.
I appreciate your indulgence in letting me just talk about that.
But yeah, thanks for putting it on the table. So I think we'll touch on that in a future PAC meeting, maybe, rather than here. Seeing no other comments from PAC members, I'll turn to public comments. So Madam Secretary, do you have the timer ready?
Yes, I also wanted to add that we did receive public comments from Mr. Bartlebaum, I believe. And so those have been received by the Park Advisory Committee and distributed. And so I just wanted to mention that this evening. So looks like we have, I believe you mentioned Kelly Abreu, and so I will put the timer up.
Okay, go ahead, Kelly.
Okay, yeah. When you can point to anywhere in North America and say that it needs more recognition of the Native Americans, and we're doing that over here in Fremont. We've got a Chechenya Trail going up. I think you just saw that on the slides, and we've got a lot of Native American stuff going on over here at Coyote Hills, which is very good. And because there's a lot of organized community over there, and there's a lot of archaeological stuff going on. It's very deep and it's very broad over there. But over here in San Ramon, with this Faria thing, if there's anything that's near and dear to the Portuguese community, besides soccer and cattle ranching, it's cattle ranching. So this word, and speaking on the word that we were just talking about, I thought I'd dive into that word. The word is saudade. Saudade is a Portuguese word meaning a vague and constant desire for something that does not and probably cannot exist, for something other than the present, a turning towards the past or towards the future, not an active discontent or poignant sadness, but an indolent dreaming wistfulness. And that's a quote from a man who lived in Portugal 110 years ago. And I'm sure it's a very still accurate, and we're still feeling the same way, a constant discontent with the present. But we should celebrate our cattle ranching and once again today's soccer victory. My condolences to the Uruguayans. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly. Jim?
Great. Thank you, PAC members. My name is Jim Hansen, Conservation Chair, East Bay CNPS. I will admit I'm a little confused with the purpose of the public hearing. It does say to take comments on a draft environmental impact report. So I'm just going to wing it. Just a couple points. I think at this point, there's not a lot of time to go into it, but the regarding mitigation for affected special status plants and sensitive natural communities, the mitigations say, well, we'll try to get these populations replaced elsewhere if they're affected. And we know that that's often difficult to do, so that we need to have more description of how that would be done. That's kind of not really fully covered in the EIR. I think a bigger point is this is really a wilderness preserve. It's really a special designation you don't see in many of the parks, and it raises the question of of us and what the district as a public steward should be doing to really give wilderness its due. I will say that I took a look at a proposed new trail construction on the west side of Bollinger Canyon on what was described as I think the Old Corral staging site. And I think it was called the Sparrow Trail or the Robin Trail. I don't know. I'm just going to kind of show this. Well, I can't show it very well. It won't focus. But it's figure 4.3-2B. I think it's worth looking at because I'm really concerned it actually is cut through coast live oak woodland, royal thicket, coast live oak woodland riparian, chemise chaparral, black shade sage scrub, creeping wild rye, which is a sensitive natural community. It goes right next to a pond. It goes through 5 seasonal wetlands and 5 tributaries. And it just looking at that, we're still analyzing, that's quite a bit. I see that my time is short, and I'll just comment also that with regard to trails, our understanding, I think it would be very helpful to describe multi-use. We've understand that to include all uses. And the plan does list what, it mentions all these, well, anyway, it mentions that these will only be considered for the purposes of the EIR. And so I do think that needs to be really explained in the EIR. So thank you. I'll leave it at that.
Okay. Thank you, Jim. I'm not sure if it sounded more like a comment than if there a question in there. And maybe there was a question about the planning for avoiding sensitive areas in the trail design.
Chair, we're going to take in all the comments that we get here and questions, and we're going to take all that information and we're going to provide responses and the responses to comments. And I do want to ensure, Mr. Hanson, as I fully expect you will, are accepting written comments throughout December 15th on the CEQA document. And so much more extensive comments can be provided up to then. And then of course, comments on the land use plan can be provided up until its adoption and at its final hearing. So this is a hearing to get comments. It's one of multiple strategies that we use to get public comments. So we host a meeting, we take in written comments. We'll take in comments any way that we can get them. So but responses will be provided to everyone that comes in.
Great, thank you for that. And seeing no further comments.
I couldn't raise my hand because I switched to my phone and I can't find it. So I appreciate Irene for speaking up, and I am concerned that none of the meetings and the oppositions was voiced in this meeting. The neighbors have spent thousands of dollars, probably like $75,000 fighting this. It's causing traumatic stress in the person that's going to be affected. The plan does not have the community meetings. It's not easily accessible. I told this to Kim weeks ago, that you can't see any of the community comments against it, what was done to fight it. And there's just a little section about, oh, the noise, and the noise is acceptable. The noise isn't acceptable if you have a history of trauma. A firefighter lives next door to this. Their ability to tolerate sound is a lot different than most people sound. If you have trauma or PTSD, it's significantly harder to be able to manage it. This person will never have peace or predictability or feel safe in his house once this is 50 feet from his house. And you guys are ignoring all this. None of this was in your meeting. None of this was in your plan. I see him, and he's greatly affected. Every breath of him is affected by what you guys are doing. And you totally ignored it. You go in detail about frogs and salamanders and dirt and trees and birds, which I think is important. But what about the human? What about the human next door to it? That every door slam, every noise, all the comments will be a reminder that he will never have peace or predictability. I was over his house when you guys were across the street. I could hear the voices echoing off of his garage. The sound in that area is horrible. And then you name it Old Corrals. Guess who built that corrals? The guy who doesn't want it that close to his house. That's who built the corrals. So it seems like not very smart to name it Old Corrals, and you're not talking to him and see what he does like. And we agree it's your property, but we would like it in a different spot or a different location so he can have peace. We're worried about fires, and we're also worried about the car traffic, because I've almost been hit like 5 times on that corner, and people pass bikes all the time in that corner, and I'm almost hit. So there's also that too. And I put more in my comments, but as Irene said, none of them are available to you guys. And you ignored the comments over the past 5 years that everybody sent to you. You ignored the post that says, respect your neighbors, East Bay Park. We don't want you here. We want you here, but we don't want you there. You ignore everything the neighbors are saying. And you're causing like PTSD symptoms in your neighbors. You're causing intentional trauma. You cost him over $75,000, 5 years of his life. So please address that too.
Okay, thank you for that comment, Virginia. I think,
Please
as
take
Brian,
it seriously, though. Please take it seriously. You're causing traumatic stress in your neighbors.
okay, I think as Brian Holt said a moment ago, I think all of these public comments are being recorded and being included in the record and passed on to the board, who will ultimately make the decision. Are there any other comments from the public? I see Michelle Lacey's hand.
I would like to make a motion that the PAC forward, what is the actual, I'm sorry, I thought I had it. Recommend that the environmental impact report and land use plan amendment for the Southern Las Trampas Wilderness Regional Preserve be forwarded to the board of directors for consideration.
Second.
Okay, I have Michelle with the motion and Rick seconding. Madam Secretary, could you take the roll call vote, please?
Absolutely. Andrew Carey,
Aye.
Susie Claxton,
Sorry, I had
thank
to
you.
unmute. Thank you.
No worries. Thank you, Susie. Linda Deschambeau.
I'm unmuted now. And I'm on.
Aye.
Irene Dieter.
Aye.
Luana Espana.
Aye.
Michelle Lacey.
Aye.
Dev Mahadevan. We'll come back to you, Dev. Rochelle Nason.
Aye.
Dev Mahadevan.
I think Dev noted that he had to leave the meeting.
Oh, did he? Oh, my apologies. Rick Rickard.
Aye.
Alyssa Robinson.
Aye.
Olivia San Wong.
Yes.
Bob Simmons.
Aye.
Igor Skerdoff.
Aye.
And acting chair Neil Titsui.
Aye.
Motion passes.
Great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
And so I think, so it is very late. We have one more item. It's not an action item, it's an informational item. And I think hopefully we can push through it pretty quickly and not push it forward to a different meeting. So I'd like to go ahead and move on to that. And that's the electric bicycle policy update from Deputy General Manager Jim O'Connor.
Good evening, everybody. Let me share my screen. I'll run through this as quick as I can. Let's see. Do you guys see my note screen or the main screen?
The main screen.
Okay, great. I'm going to move on. So what I was asked to do tonight is I was asked by the board's executive committee to take this item to the PAC. I also note that this item was on your work plan for 2022, so we're hitting two birds with one stone here. Let me first, on the topic of electric bicycles, let me do a little bit of a look at current policy and regulations. So the 2013 district master plan update included the following language in regarding to public access. The district will cooperate with local regional planning efforts to create a more walkable and bikeable communities and coordinate park access opportunities with local trail and bike paths developed by other agencies to promote green transportation access to regional parks and trails. Since the 2000, the Park District has received more than $48 million for trail development. So I just wanted to note that a great majority of that is related to our paved regional trail system, which of course is used by commuters. In 2015, then Governor Brown signed AB 1096, which related to electric bicycles. That legislation reclassified electric bicycles from motor vehicles to bicycles. It created 3 classes of bikes, which I'll talk about in a minute. And those electric bicycles are limited to motors of 750 watts, which is about 1 horsepower. It allowed for e-bike use on bicycle paths, bikeways, and bicycle lanes as defined by the vehicle code. What was interesting about this, it allowed the legislation defined class 1 and 2 as being allowed unless restricted by local jurisdiction, and class 3 bikes were prohibited unless allowed by the local jurisdiction. Really quickly, class 1, class 2, and class 3. Class 1 bikes are pedal assist bikes, meaning there's no throttle. and the motor assists the pedaling up to 20 miles an hour. Class 2 bikes are throttle bikes. They have a throttle, and the motor assists via the throttle up to 20 miles an hour. And then Class 3 bikes are pedal assist, but the motor will assist up till 28 miles per hour. In terms of how has the East Bay Regional Parks responded to this legislation, based on input from the public wanting to use electric bicycles in, especially on regional trails, in 2017 to 18, we conducted an e-bike pilot project on 3 of our paved regional trails. Once we gathered the data from that pilot project, we did go to the board, and the board approved an amendment to Ordinance 38, which allows Class 1 and Class 2 e-bikes on 8 of our paved trails. And that includes the Alameda Creek Trail on the paved side, Big Break Trail, Contra Costa Canal Trail, Delta de Anza Trail, the George Miller Trail, the Iron Horse Trail, the Lafayette Moraga Trail, and the Marsh Creek Trail. And those that was added in 2019. So let's talk about e-bikes and what's happening in the world of e-bikes. In 2021, 880,000 e-bikes were purchased in the United States. That's almost double the 450,000 that were sold in 2020, and 3.5 times the 250,000 bikes that were sold in 2019. Most of these bikes that were sold, e-bikes are sold in the United States, are Class 1 e-bikes. Those are the pedal assist up to 20 miles per hour. Globally, the e-bike industry is expected to be valued at almost $41 billion by the end of the decade. E-bikes costs have significantly reduced over time. And in fact, the picture you see on the screen there is an e-bike that is a Class 1 e-bike that goes for $899. That's under $1,000. So the market is changing quickly, and more bikes are showing up in our parks, as I think most of you know. So if you look at what's happening Bay Area wide in terms of public agencies that manage recreational trails, you'll see what we have here. Santa Clara County allows Class 1 and Class 2 bikes everywhere the conventional bikes are allowed, including their unpaved trails. Peninsula allows Class 1 and 2 only on improved trails at Ravenswood Preserve and Rancho San Antonio Preserve. Marin County allows Class 2, that should be Class 2 and Class 1 and 2 on paved bicycle trails and roads only unless signed for use. Municipal Water District does not allow e-bikes. They're only allowed on public roads that are accessible by motor vehicles. Walnut Creek Open Space allows Class 1 and 2 anywhere conventional bikes are allowed. Sonoma County Parks allows Class 1 anywhere conventional bikes are allowed. Solano County allows Class 1 e-bikes anywhere conventional bikes are allowed. The California State Parks are unique in that each superintendent can make a decision on where they're allowed, but when you look at that, it's mostly Class 1 bikes where conventional bikes are allowed, and Class 3 in some of the state vehicle recreation areas. The National Park Service at Golden Gate National Recreation Area allows Class 1 and 2 anywhere conventional bikes are allowed in that national recreation area. So I want to focus a little bit on one agency, Mid-Peninsula Regional Open Space District. They've done some extensive staff work in this area, which we feel here at the Park District can serve as a proxy for looking at our own trail system and this issue of use of e-bikes. So I'm going to spend some time talking about the work that Mid-Peninsula staff did. Starting in November 2019, they conducted an extensive review of e-bike access and potential impacts. Specifically, they conducted a 1-year pilot project of Class 1 and 2 e-bikes at Ravenswood and Rancho San Antonio Preserves. They did an intercept survey of unpaved trail users at Santa Clara County Parks. You recall that Santa Clara County Parks allows Class 1 and 2 e-bikes on their trails. They did a specific study on noise impacts of e-bikes, and their district science advisory panel conducted a literature review of e-bike research related impacts and benefits. And then they did a review of enforcement citation and accident reports at the Mid-Peninsula District. So quickly, I'm going to run through some of this. This was all reviewed at their board meeting on June 29th of this year. So The survey of trail users in the pilot study area, when they were asked about Class 1 e-bike use, 40% of those users contacted of 556 total supported use on paved and unpaved trails. 28% supported use on paved trails only, and 18% opposed the use of Class 1 e-bikes. Class 2 e-bikes, 21% supported on paved and unpaved trails, and 21% supported on paved trails only, and there was a 39% opposition. And of course, these are almost polar opposites in terms of support for the different classes of e-bikes. Moving on, the survey that they conducted in Santa Clara County parks, 57% of those users supported the use of Class 1 e-bikes on unpaved trails. That's out of 1,186 folks that were surveyed. 16% opposed, there were 23% neutral on the use, and 4% were unsure. Note that 7% supported that use, and 23% were neutral. They did not, during their intercept survey, they did not contact many equestrian users during that time. So what they did is they did a survey of equestrian organizations and groups that use Santa Clara County park trails. I think it's not surprising that 70% were opposed to Class 1 e-bikes on unpaved trails. When they looked at all their general comments received on this topic, including email letters and comments at public meetings, there was 69% support for e-bikes on all trails. In terms of the specific study that they did related to noise impacts, they mostly focused on, they looked at bird and bat species in terms of impacts, determined that most of the impacts were to bats due to high frequency noise generated by the electric motor. Specifically, two groups of bat. One was the Thompson's long-eared bat, and the other one were the pallet bat species. They recommended, out of that study was a recommendation for buffers between the trails and known bat roosting sites. There were 2 known sites in Mid-Peninsula's jurisdiction, and neither one of those was near a trail, recreational trail. Keep moving on. In terms of the literature review that their science advisory panel undertook, they determined that too few studies on e-bike impacts to be statistically useful. So there was just very few studies that they could find that were specifically addressing this issue of e-bike use. Based on the information they found, they had 6 potential impacts that they were addressed: wildlife disturbance, noise, distance and duration in terms of how far any bike use could go compared to a normal bike, soils erosion, impacts of vegetation, and visitor experience. Most of these issues that they addressed were consistent with conventional bike impacts, and their management recommendations were consistent with the current practice in managing conventional bikes. In the end, the board voted it was 4 no's, I had that wrong, it's 4 no's, 2 ayes, and no, I had that wrong. 4 yeses, 2 no's, and 2 absences in terms of they affirmed the continued prohibition of e-bikes on their district unpaved trails. So they did continue to allow Class 1 and 2 e-bikes allowed on limited improved trails at Ravenswood Open Space Preserve and Rancho San Antonio Preserve, which is similar to the pilot project that they conducted previously. The key policy decision for that board was one policy: preservation for the opportunity of tranquil nature study and observation. So what are the key takeaways from the information that we've gathered to date? Is many Bay Area public agencies that manage public recreational trail systems have adopted policies allowing Class 1 e-bikes anywhere conventional bikes are allowed. Current scientific research does not show the impacts of e-bikes differ from that of conventional bikes except for noise. And that was one study that was conducted. Management of e-bikes is almost identical to conventional bikes except for the potential impacts related to noise. E-bike usage has become common in district parks to the point that enforcement of restrictions would be time-consuming and non-productive compared to a focus on rider behavior which our chief puts in terms of behavior over batteries, in terms of the rider's behaviors such as speed. E-bikes can facilitate trail access for older people and others with mobility challenges, are playing an increasingly vital role in promoting green transportation options. So based on that information and our own personal experience here at the Park District, the district staff are considering a recommendation to the board to allow Class 1 e-bikes on all district trails that currently allow the use of conventional bikes. And to continue to allow Class 2 e-bikes on 8 paved regional trails that are currently allowed their use under Ordinance 38. And so once again, the board's executive committee asked that I bring this item to the PAC and gather your input that'll be used for further deliberations on this item in the new year. And I will stop screen sharing and answer any questions.
Great. Thank you for that presentation. It's the doubling of the sales of e-bikes from 2020 to 2021, I'm sure is going to be dwarfed by the scale from 21 to 22. It seems like they're just everywhere now.
Potentially, yes.
Go ahead, Irene.
Hi, yes. This is the first time e-bikes have come before the PAC, correct?
As far as I know, yes.
Okay, because it had said an update and I couldn't remember it before. So I would say that a lot of the report is pretty, it's to be expected because I know that cities around the Bay Area are promoting e-bikes for around the neighborhoods. So that's why the sales are way up. People are using them to go to work. And I will also say that based on the conditions that you put forward, that a lot of the e-bikes that the Park District has supported has to do with transportation on paved trails, and the same with paved trails in other jurisdictions. So that all pretty much to me is going to be a pretty standard result on all that. So I think for today's purpose, the real question is, should the Park District go from no e-bikes on unpaved trails to having e-bikes on all unpaved trails? So that's a big step forward. And I'm wondering if the Park District might be better off picking a couple of trails and doing pilots the same way Mid-Penn did it on their particular, the way that they moved forward. Because a lot of the participants that filled out those surveys, a lot of them were opposed to having e-bikes on some of these trails, and especially the fact that the Park District is allowing bikes on some of the narrower trails. So I would just, after listening to this, I think that we need to decide how wide multi-trail uses are before we move forward, and perhaps just stick with a pilot on a couple trails to begin with. So that's my first initial reaction to this. Thank you.
Just one clarification, Irene. I just want to make sure that the proposal that we're thinking of is on trails that currently allow bikes. And remember, those are restricted as per Ordinance 38. So I just want to make sure I clarify that for everybody.
Right, but they are not there. But right now, electric bikes are not permitted on those trails, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so it is all the trails. Okay, thank you.
Go ahead, Susie.
Yeah, I agree with most of what Irene was saying. I think there's a concern about this kind of big jump to having e-bikes on trails. And Jim, excuse me, can you tell me with these class 1 bikes, these are they just assist you in pedaling, right? The class 1. What's the typical speed of those? You're talking about behavior, which is mostly the speed concern.
Well, a really good question, Susie. Here's the thing: is that an e-bike will help you climbing uphill, right? In terms of assisting you going uphill. And there was a reference in some of the trail I was reviewing, and they looked at the speed of electric bikes versus conventional bikes going uphill. And this was only one study, but they were only about like 1.2 miles an hour difference. The difference between 12 and almost 14 in terms of going uphill. On the downhill side, that's all gravity. That has nothing to do with the motor. So as we like to say is, if you're an out of control person who's not riding in control, it doesn't matter what type of bike you're on. So the motor has nothing to do with people's behavior in terms of downhill speed. So that's irrelevant in terms of people speeding. But I think the issue is really like this, whether or not you would notice a person on an e-bike. I can tell you, I've been out, I hike on our trails a lot, and there's a lot of e-bikes out there, and the difference is not that different.
Okay.
So anyway, good question though, thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Olivia?
Yes, I just want to correct one of the comments. We have reviewed this on the PAC before. It was in 2017. I remember that's for me personally when I first became aware of e-bikes. And I believe that there was a good discussion at that point in time. And we did I think we made a recommendation even at that PAC meeting. So that might also be something good to maybe go back and look at the records from at some point, because that was early on in terms of this e-bike boom. Based on observations in terms of what's happening in the parks now, do we have a good sense of, I know it might be more anecdotal, but in terms of the e-bike usage, whether it's allowed or not allowed, because anecdotally, I know I hear that e-bikes are being used. So just be helpful to kind of start to keep track of some of that data.
We don't have any specific data like on the trails that don't allow bikes currently on basically the unpaved trails. We don't have any data on that. I am working with the police department to start adding in a field within their database that will track that information in terms of accidents and citations. So we're going to add that information in. So we do start to gather some specific data related to e-bikes, but right now we do not have that. And thank you for the reminder that we did bring the paved regional trail issue and that ordinance change to the PAC. I completely forgot about that. So thank you for the reminder. So that was the last time that we had brought this item. And that was based on the pilot project we conducted in 17 and 18.
Michelle?
Great. Thanks, Neil. So I first wanted to thank Jim for the thorough report. I really appreciated the information and good use of using survey and data collected by other similar organizations. I appreciated that. In one of the things I wanted to note that I don't think you highlighted enough is really the enforcement side of this, that it is happening now wherever bikes are. Class 1 bikes are there. Class 1 bike, most people will not be able to tell I have a Class 1 bike, Class 1 mountain bike. If you put it next to a regular mountain bike, not going to be able to tell what it is, except unless I start riding it, and I can get up the hill a little easier now that I'm on my old knees. But I think it's reasonable, and I support the staff, moving forward on recommending at least Class 1 bikes, the ones without the throttle, on all trails that allow bikes. They're virtually different. They're not very different. And I think, burdening our PD and public safety staff with trying to police that, those kind of nuances is really difficult when we have a lot of other issues in the park. I wasn't surprised at all by the survey information. There are certain groups that are not going to, are never going to be supportive of this. But I think, for equity as well as accessibility, I think it's a good move for us to move forward. I know we're not asking for a recommendation, but I did want to let staff know that I am supportive of the direction you're moving in.
Yeah, thank you. And just another note of data is that the vast majority of mountain bikes, e-mountain bikes, are Class 1 bikes. The industry that's what people want for the most part. So it's not a lot of Class 2 or Class 3 e-bikes. That's not what they're manufacturing. Most of them are Class 1 e-mountain bikes.
Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, thank you, Neil, and thank you, Jim, for informative presentation. My question to you really based on some of my hiking experiences. When I'm hiking in Tilden and Redwood, I don't expect a quiet environment. When I'm hiking to Murrieta Falls, I expect a quiet environment. And I noticed that I think it was the Mid-Penn talked about the value of quietness in some areas. In your consideration of the recommendation, did you consider, distinguishing between parks where you have to hike in a long distance or even ride a long distance, where there's a higher expectation of quiet, from parks that are particularly near urban areas that get a lot of people and there's a lot of activity and a lot of noise?
Good question. That wasn't considered, but I guess the question I would have is the issue comes down to is e-bikes being used as an accessibility issue in terms of a tool, technology for accessibility. And I would say that, then it comes down to the question whether or not those folks have the right to access those areas if they have this technology that allows them now to access that further distance. And I would say yes, that if the e-bike allows them that access in terms of any kind of a mobility issue, I would say that's an affirmative, that they should be able to use that and they have a right to access that like anybody else. The other thing about the noise that's interesting in terms of like the Mid-Penn study, one of the questions that wasn't brought up in the study, which I thought was interesting, was the duration of noise. They talked about frequency and attenuation with distance from the noise source, but they never talked about the duration. And remember, even uphill, a bike is a very short period of time where they may be within even the buffer recommendation that the study recommended. So that's something to consider also. So, and that noise that comes from e-bikes, it's going to be pretty minimal. In terms of it's going to come by you, you're going to hear it for a little bit, and then it's gone off in the distance. It's not so loud that you hear it for long periods of time. So that's just my comments based on my own experience out there on the trails.
Luana?
Hi, my connection dropped, so I may be repeating some comments that were already stated. I wanted to just as far as thank you for the presentation tonight on e-bikes. I believe this is an area that should have been included in the trail users working group report. It's a topic that we didn't address. And just as far as e-bikes in the parks, there's not a run I go on where I don't see an e-bike. So e-bikes are there, and definitely I'm glad we're starting to look at different policies around e-bikes. And I think one thing that is very important that has been mentioned is just the accessibility issue. There are a lot of aging riders or other individuals that, as far as they have more access and mobility with the e-bikes, and then they're also continuing to be able to enjoy the trail system here for a longer period of time and go out farther. So, I mean, those are pluses. So definitely look forward to seeing more research. And then just as far as for some of What we haven't seen in the reports is just kind of doing, more research in the East Bay Regional Parks to see what are the overall impacts. So we have that data so we can make different types of policies so that we're actually acknowledging the changes that are happening in our parks, and also providing that type of environment where all different types of users are able to access the park. And then just as far as on the different types of trails where it's most appropriate for, multi-use. That's it.
Great, thank you. Igor.
Hi, I was listening to Jim very carefully, and something that struck me was that most of the organizations that have come up with policies have very similar policies for bikes and e-bikes, especially with the class 1, not the high-powered ones. And then something that also Jim said struck me. He said the main thing that e-bike gets you is being able to get up the hill. When you're coming down the hill, an e-bike doesn't behave any differently than a regular bike. And so what we're talking about is behavior rather than hardware so much. And it seems to me that there's going to be problems with rogue e-bikers. There are already problems with rogue non-e-bikers as well, and hikers and horse people as well. So it just seems like there's enough experience out there, enough practical application out there already that we don't really need to reinvent the wheel. We're not unique from all these other organizations who manage the bikes on trails. And I'm pretty well convinced that as long as we still try to use the rule of law or common sense or decency to govern the behavior on the trails, whether it be bikes or e-bikes, I'm perfectly okay with kind of emphasizing the outcomes rather than the hardware so much.
All right, thanks, Igor. Rick?
Yes, thank you. I'll be very brief. Jim has heard my spiel before. I'm the owner. I'm one of Luana's old guys on a bike. I'm the owner of a class 3 bike that I ride primarily on roads and trails. So I'm not in the mountain biking category so much, but I want to endorse Chief Chaburro's behavior versus battery idea, because I didn't buy a class 3 bike so I could go over 20 miles an hour with pedal assist. In fact, in a year and a half of having it, I've never used that. I don't go that fast, or if I do, I'm going downhill, which, as Jim said, you can do on any bike, not just an e-bike. So I just want to strongly endorse behavior versus batteries in setting policies.
Great, thanks, Rick. And seeing no other hands from PAC members, I'll turn to the public. So I see William has his hand up. Go ahead, William.
Okay, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep, we can hear you.
Excellent. So 2 weeks ago, I hiked the Snow Ridge, which is recently opened. This is in the town of Snow. It goes up 2,000 feet. You get on top of the ridge. There's another mile or so that you can go on ridge line, and then you can drop down into the side of the mountain. And there's approximately 16 miles of trail along the face of the mountain, but you have to go up 2,000 feet to get to those trails. I met approximately 10 other hikers on the trail while I was there. I also met four mountain bikers on the trail, 3 of them riding electric bikes. Of course, electric bikes are banned in all parks at this point, except a very few. Interestingly enough, the one person who was riding a mountain bike that wasn't electrified was sweating like a dog. I mean, he was working to get up that 2,000 feet. The other 3, not a problem. They passed us as walking without any issue. I look at it and, you know, to me, an electric bike is heavier than a normal mountain bike because you've got batteries. Your riders tend to be slightly different. They tend to be older than a mountain biker, than a normal mountain biker because of the expense of the mountain bike. $1,000, yes, for mountain bikes and not for non-mountain bikes. For these are just road bikes that you're going to use, you know, to go from between your house and the BART station, for instance. Yeah, $1,000 is possible. Mountain bikes, no, a good mountain bike doesn't start until you get around the 2,000 range. The other issue is the enforcement. You know, let's not even talk about enforcement. East Bay Regional doesn't do it. 120 tickets in 44 months. For mountain bike, you know, citations, that indicates that East Bay Regional is not enforcing the existing citations. Jim O'Connor told this committee about Briones, where they had 16 miles of trails in 2015 that were illegal, and it's now over 30 miles of illegal trails. Enforcement doesn't happen. So you can't use enforcement as a means of controlling people that are building trails or riding mountain bikes. So the issue is, what is happening? What will happen when you have a bunch of mountain bikers that have e-bikes out on these trails? And the issue is the distance and habitat destruction. And those are the distance covered. The gentleman that was riding the 900-watt electric bike, his buddy had a 500-watt system, and he had an extra 500-watt power pack in his backpack. They traversed the entire park, all 18 miles, in 4 hours. My buddy and I climbed to the top and climbed back down, and we were beat. We did 4 miles in, 4 miles out. That's 8 miles. There is a lot of trail that we didn't cover in that park. The e-bikers, not a problem. So that means that your impact on habitat is much greater. Your ability in terms of your not having the physical shape to go up the mountain, but you can use the bike to do that for you, means that you can get yourself into a lot more danger. So my final point is, East Bay is not set up to handle the litigation that's going to occur from people smashing into stuff with these bikes, whether it's other hikers or trees or, you know, trailheads. There's going to be damage, needs to be handled. I don't see it. I don't see any talk about liability. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, William. Jim, go ahead.
Thank you, and thank you all for hanging in there. I'm going to, I think there's a lot to talk about here, and I just want to support all of you who are saying this is a big deal, and that looking at it closely is the right thing to do. And that sounds like that's a recommendation to the board. I don't understand that there's any action being taken at this time. So just in that light, yeah, let's look at what Mid-Penn did, and let's look at what Rin Water District is doing right now. Mid-Penn did a census survey, looked at visitor management, gathered a lot of data as Mr. O'Connor described. And then Rin Water District recently basically said we're not going to add e-mountain bikes onto our trails at this time, but we are going to do a recreation plan. And that recreation plan includes community workshops. I think they've done like 5 or so this year to engage the public in this whole topic. And then they have several next year, including some field trip and so forth. So that gets at how do we deal with this? And perhaps that gets back to the Briones pilot project, where I've been going out to Briones and looking at it more carefully, and I've talked to families who've experienced e-bikes. They're out with kids and so forth, and I've heard some comments, and I will not say that they've been positive, but that's just one story. So what's the story here? Now, in terms of age, I frankly have not seen anybody over 55 on an e-mountain bike at the places I've been. So let's find out who the age group is, what the needs are, both for the walking public, the equestrian, and the hiking, as Mrs. Spanier was, I think, alluding to. And then, as I recall, at the end of the executive committee meeting, I believe this, I don't want to represent another board member, but I think the thing was said, we need to include a look at the electric mountain bikes in the Briones pilot. So anyway, I'm just going to leave it at that and appreciate the conversation tonight. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jim. And thanks to all of you for all your feedback, and thanks to Jim O'Connor for the presentation. I'm sure we're gonna be hearing about this again in the new year, and so it's part of the ongoing dialogue. And so this is just an informational item, so I think there's no further action to take on this. We'll go ahead and move on to our next agenda items. That was the last of our presentations. So next up, we have PAC member comments. Are there any comments from the PAC? I have one brief one. Just I think many of you saw this announcement that there's a recognition get together for Beverly Lane and Ann Wieskamp commemorating their retirement. So that's November 30th at the Park District headquarters at 2 p.m. At the little park outside the Park District headquarters. And so if you're able to make that, that would be great. Go ahead, Susie.
Oh, I just wanted to tell you all about something that I think is exciting that I've been working on, which is we have a green team that works on climate issues at my church, Niles Discovery Church in Fremont. And we also partner with a community organization called Urban Forest Friends. They used to be Tri-City Urban Forest Alliance, but they do tree plantings and coordinate volunteers using youth groups and other people that are interested in planting trees to, for climate. And we're partnering now with an East Bay Park. We're going to be planting about 80, mostly oak varieties of trees at Quarry Lakes. They're going to be filling in some areas that are mostly like scrub, coyote brush, and low shrubs, and planting oak trees. So we're putting together a volunteer pool to do it, and it's going to be in January of 2023. So it's exciting.
Great, thanks, Susie. Andrew?
Sure. My constituents approached me about an issue they had over Labor Day with some communications that came out of East Bay Regional Parks about park closures. The parks were closed over Labor Day because of excessive heat, but not all the parks were closed. Really, the communication was worded, the parks that were open were cut off by a lot of the copies of communications shown. The result was a number of parks had reduced attendance. Anyway, that was a concern that district needs to make it really clear when they're communicating park openings and closings, which parks they're talking about. That's it. Otherwise, this has been a really productive meeting. Thank you.
Great, thank you. And seeing no other hands, I'll move on to report from the chair, and I have no report. Board committee reports. Is there anyone who wants to report out from a board committee they attended? Seeing none. On to old business, of which I believe there is none. New business.
Actually, sorry. So old business is just a reminder that we're having the PAC recognition event here at the headquarters on December 12th. That will be at your regular scheduled PAC time at 4 p.m. And so we look forward to seeing everyone.
Great, thanks, Yuli. Rochelle?
Will there be a Zoom option for people who can't be there in person for whatever reason?
I don't believe there will, Rochelle, but I'm going to take a couple pictures and I'll send them to you.
Thank you. All right.
Okay, any more old business? New business, or I don't know if that was new business. Okay, and so if there are no other comments, then I will adjourn this meeting at 7:15 p.m. Thank you all for hanging tough till the end.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye.
Good night.